Chapter 51 Mingi's Spirit. Blood and brain matter mixed together, interweaving a brutal color. Pointed shoes stepped on the blood-red mud, and the blond boy with blood all over his face showed morbid joy and satisfaction, laughing wildly. The noble and sacred blood deeply impressed each of them. Doflamingo smiled coldly, stepped over Phil's body and continued to walk forward. The fingers of his hands kept moving, as if they were connecting something. As he moved, it seemed as if there was something sharp in the air that kept passing through, leaving smooth cuts on the streets, on the walls of buildings, on the ground. At the same time, in front of him, more than a dozen members of the Phil's gang family stopped moving. A bright red, dazzling blood line gradually enlarged from their throats. They couldn't react at all, and they felt that the world in front of them suddenly began to tilt and turn upside down. Then, they saw their own bodies. They saw their own shoes. A look of doubt appeared in their wooden, gradually dilating pupils. Finally, they lost their vitality. Their heads were separated from their bodies. Swish. On the headless bodies standing still, blood spurted out from the cuts on their necks like fountains, spilling all over the ground. Ying. Doflamingo laughed more and more crazily. In the terrified eyes of the Firth family, he continued to move forward, spreading blood, pain and crying along the way. Then, kill them all. Doflamingo smiled and gave the order. As soon as the words fell, the eyes of the pirates of the Don Quixote family flashed with scarlet and crazy light. Like extremely hungry beasts, they launched an attack without hesitation. In just a short moment, dozens of gangsters of the Firth family fell to the ground and died. So, the one-sided massacre began. On the originally prosperous streets, blood flowed like a stream, and the air was filled with the pungent smell of blood. Doflamingo stood in the middle of the street, looking at the purgatory-like scene in front of him. He couldn't help but take a deep breath. Ying all equal shi duo chao yi guan, s life. A chaotic world, all the sins are derived, and only the winner can go to the final stage. What an interesting world. What a wonderful world. Ying. He opened his arms wantonly, and his body, which was less than 1.5 meters tall, exuded a domineering, cruel, and unruly aura. Everywhere was filled with the smell of thick smoke, stinky sweat, gunpowder, blood, corpses, and fear. This was his favorite smell. The smell of chaos. In the burning town, he saw the eyes of the members of the Firth family looking at him. The eyes of fear, submission, trembling, and not daring to look directly at them. Yes, that was the look. The lowly ants living in this world should look at me with such eyes. Father, did you see it? This is the look that the untouchables should cast at us. This is the life that we, the noble celestial dragons, should enjoy. In a trance, Doflamingo seemed to remember that time. He still remembered the bloody smell, the stench of sweat and gunpowder, the deafening screams, the curses of hatred and resentment, and the twisted faces swaying in the flames. The untouchables who should have knelt on the ground held torches and arrows in their hands. And they, as great celestial dragons, the noble Don Quixote family, were tied to the city wall like pigs and beasts, and were almost burned to death. Father, you are wrong. You are wrong. I am right. Doflamingo clenched his fists, and his sunglasses flashed a cold and cruel light. Rip. A pale thunder suddenly tore open the dark sky, completely illuminating the hellish world. The long brewing storm finally came, and heavy rain began to fall in the gloomy sky. Lightning and thunder. Wa-la-la. The heavy rain washed everything on the earth. Washing the blood. Slapping the corpses. Extinguishing the flames. The thunder in the sky gradually became deafening, drowning out the shouts and wails on the streets. The killing gradually subsided, and the massacre entered its final stage. With the death of the leader and in the face of Doflamingo's overwhelming strength, the members of the Firth family had already lost the courage to continue fighting. They kept begging, even kneeling on the ground begging for mercy. But what greeted them was only the ruthless knives of the Don Quixote family. Half an hour passed quickly. The sudden rainstorm disappeared suddenly. On the streets washed by the rain, white mist emerged from the ruins of buildings everywhere, red blood seeped into the gaps between bricks and stones, and corpses fell to the ground in all directions. I don't know when. He was the only one standing on the street. Raindrops dripped from his hair, clothes and trousers to the ground. Around him, Torrebel and other members of the Don Quixote family knelt on one knee, looking respectful, with their weapons still dripping with blood, quietly waiting for their king to give orders. Go, take over this island, come. The smile on Doflamingo's face had faded, and he said grimly. Try not to use violence against civilians, and let this island know clearly that the arrival of our Don Quixote family will only bring them a more stable life. His hands trembled slightly, as if he was trying his best to curb the urge to destroy everything in his heart. But he knew he had to control himself. Lubeck Island, no, the North Sea is just a beginning. Before setting foot on a wider world, he knew he had to make as much primitive accumulation as possible. Wandering around the world. Continuously plundering towns one by one. That's what low-level pirates would do. Territory. Power. Resources. Step by step, swallowing up everything, controlling enough resources and power. One day, the whole world will kneel before him, Doflamingo. And before that, he must try to restrain himself. Hearing this, the members of the Don Quixote family looked at him with more admiration, and bowed their heads in submission. Only those who control their desires and impulses are worthy of their lives to follow. This is their young master. Pa 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 pa. At this time, an inappropriate applause sounded. The people of the Don Quixote family were stunned at first, and then turned around with a vigilant face and looked in the direction of the sound. I saw a tall and straight figure standing on the top of a building ruin at some point, clapping his hands and looking down at their young master with interest. Good spirit and vision. The faces of pure playboys and those who are determined to do great things are completely different. You are very good, Doflamingo. The black-haired young man smiled. Please thank you for everything. Chapter 52 I want to talk about it. Doflamingo narrowed his eyes under his sunglasses and looked at the uninvited guest seriously. The black-haired young man stood on the ruins of the building with white smoke, clapping his hands. He was tall and straight, different from ordinary people. His short black hair and the wide white cloak behind him gently swayed with the wind full of gunpowder. Although he was a low-class pariah, this young man gave him the feeling of a tall, fierce and handsome beast, exuding an aristocratic temperament that only elite celestial dragons have. He had a deep face like a warrior, and such a person would laugh out loud at his own pain. Strong but elegant. Wild but noble. Arrogant but smart. This is a man whose eyes are always on the distant horizon, the man on the line. He had an interested smile on his face. Doflamingo knew that smile very well. He had shown a similar smile to his target countless times in the past. The hunter looked at his prey, a teasing smile like a cat catching a mouse. The moment this thought came to Doflamingo, he suddenly felt the irrepressible desire for destruction deep in his heart. An uncontrollable desire and anger to kill this man, no, to destroy him completely. How dare he look at me with such eyes? That look was very similar to the look those 5 damn old men of the world government gave me when I was carrying my father's head up the stairway to heaven. Doflamingo. Navy. Torrebel reacted quickly, and the moment he saw the military uniform on Darren, he confirmed his identity. Instantly, Darren felt the killing intent surge from all directions like a tide. Swish, swish, swish. The members of the Don Quixote family scattered around raised their spears in unison, staring fiercely at the black-haired marine, and hundreds of black muzzles were all focused on Darren. They are the Don Quixote pirates. They never took the marines seriously. Hey, 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 you're pulling out your guns just because you don't agree with me. At this time, the naval captain raised his hands in surrender and said with a smile. This action, is he surrendering? When Torrebel and others saw Darren raising his hands, strange and absurd expressions appeared on their faces. But the following strange scene made them suddenly feel a piercing chill surging from the soles of their feet and rushing to their brains in an instant. I don't like being pointed at by a gun. The naval captain laughed. The members of the Don Quixote family were all stunned. Suddenly, An invisible force suddenly spread from the rear admiral in front of them. They only felt that the gun in their hands was suddenly wrapped by an irresistible force and flew out of their hands uncontrollably. I saw the fine steel spear floating in the air and turning, and the muzzle was actually aimed at their eyebrows. What kind of power is this? The faces of the people in the Don Quixote family changed drastically. The pistol actually moved by itself. They had never have you ever seen such a strange power. When the muzzle of the gun was pointed at their foreheads, they subconsciously raised their hands. Click. The safety of the long gun suspended in the air was, automatically, opened. The trigger was pulled in little by little. Such a terrifying scene. Such a close distance. They even smelled the gunpowder in their own guns. Time seemed to stop at this moment. The whole street was extremely quiet, and you could hear a pin drop. Only hundreds of musket triggers were pulled little by little. Ka, sheng shi wei wu bai de chuan chu. Yi gu cheng lai wu bai de si wang kong ju shun jian chong kai lata men de da nao, rang ta men mei yi ge ren do man lian sha bai. Yu ren fa chu la hu long gun dong tun yan tuo mo de sheng yin. N, ji shao jie yang da jia do ju shou tu zhang la, guji bo lu sa li nuo na jia huo wei hen chi huan jie fu wa mian nei. Da lun kan jie yuan ben chi shi shang de hai zei men bei zi ji de cheng ji jie, chi shua sha de mian wu shui sei ju chi shuang shou de yang zi, ren bu zu diao kan li ju. Ta zhuan tu kan shang na ge jin fa shao gui. Wei, duo fu lang ming ge, wo shang zhen ni tan yi tan. Da lun yi kai shi dan chun de shang guo lai ba duo fu lang ming ge jie ge bing tai de jin fa shao gui shou shi yi dun, shun bian da chu feng. Xin qing bu hao ju ji jia ba ta zo yi dun ji hu gan diao. Xin qing hao en, na ju ge ta yi ge tong kue. Yi zi ji de ning li, wei dui ke yi qing song quan mie tang ji he de jia zu. Bing ki jie ge shi jia sheng bu wei yu ren ji dao, ju suan shi jia zheng fu yi cha bu chu lai. As for Doflamingo's so-called celestial dragon bloodline, Darren doesn't care at all. As the incident of Shield's Saint has shown, the lives of celestial dragons are also valuable. But Doflamingo's words just now made him change his mind. It is true that Doflamingo is a twisted madman full of desire for destruction, but he is more shrewd, cunning and has a better vision than ordinary madmen. He is different from those pirates who only know how to destroy and plunder. He can restrain his desires for his own ambitions. Such a person, even if they are enemies, is worthy of Darren's high regard. And most importantly, Doflamingo's identity as a former celestial dragon, coupled with his means and abilities, should be very useful if controlled properly. If he can be controlled, many of his future actions will be much more convenient. Even the world government dare not trouble him casually, let alone the headquarters. Let's talk. Doflamingo seemed to have heard some absurd joke, and laughed sinisterly. A crisp voice sounded. Doflamingo's pupils shrank. On the chest of the black-haired Marine, a hole had been cut in the uniform. The almost transparent sharp thread, cut into his chest skin, but sparks of metal friction appeared, and it could not go in at all. Impossible. Trebol and other cadres exclaimed in horror, not daring to believe their eyes. Although the young master is still very young, with his amazing talent, he has developed the ability of the thread fruit to perfection. That kind of sharp thread can kill people invisibly. Not to mention the flesh and blood, even buildings and rocks can be cut easily. When exerting all his strength, the young master once split a pirate ship in half on the sea. But now, the young master's ability of the thread fruit can't even cut the body of this Marine. What kind of monster is this? The thread fruit. It's a pity that you haven't mastered hockey yet. Darren looked down at the sharp thread stuck between his muscles and suddenly smiled. With his current physique, except for the swordsman's slash, all attacks that were not wrapped in armament hockey would basically not cause any harm to him. Doflamingo is only 12 or 13 years old now, and he is still growing up. To be able to do this, his talent is far better than most geniuses in this sea. In the frozen eyes of the Don Quixote family, Darren stretched out his finger, hooked the thread stuck on his chest, and pulled it lightly, seemingly inadvertently. Doflamingo's face changed slightly. The thread connected to his finger sent a terrifying force that was impossible to resist. His body was dragged by the thread, flying backwards from the spot, and quickly flew towards Darren. "Since you dare to draw your gun, you should be prepared to be killed." Darren looked at Doflamingo, who was dragged by him, and said with a smile. "Snap." He snapped his fingers. Then, bang 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 bang. The sound of gunfire, denser than raindrops, continued to ring out on the street. The triggers of the long guns suspended in the air were pulled at the same time. Flowers of blood bloomed on the foreheads of the Don Quixote family members. They tilted their heads back, falling like dominoes. At this time, Doflamingo had been dragged to 3 meters in front of Darren. In his sunglasses, the cold smile on the face of the Navy was reflected. Getting closer and closer. Ask for everything, grateful. Chapter 53 The Celestial Dragons. Master. Dover. Damn it. Seeing their young master being dragged by the powerful monster-like Navy, Treble and others were so frightened that their souls were trembling and their scalps were numb. They all picked up their weapons and rushed towards Darren with their eyes wide open, trying to save Doflamingo. They didn't care about the hundreds of Don Quixote family members who were shot and killed. Time seemed to slow down at this moment. Looking at Doflamingo, who was dragged by him, the Marine captain's mouth curled up a cold smile, and a strong and deep momentum emanated from his body. The wide cloak of justice behind him moved without wind, and with the clenched fists, the air even exploded with a buzzing sound like being squeezed. The distance between the two was shortened in an instant, and in the blink of an eye, they were already close. Darren punched out heavily like a meteorite. Roar. The power and explosive power of this punch were so fierce that even the space in front of him set off a violent gust of wind, blowing Doflamingo's tender little face. Paw. Doflamingo's sunglasses were crushed into long and thin cracks by the wind pressure. What a terrifying power. This Navy is simply a real humanoid beast. Is this the person that the North Sea should have? With such a strong strength, shouldn't the Navy headquarters transfer him to the Grand Line, or the New World? Doflamingo's eyes were dazed. Even Darren's powerful punch. It seemed that there were twisted illusions in his mind. The fist wearing a black leather glove seemed to be constantly enlarged, and the shadow of an avalanche enveloped his figure. A touch of coldness suddenly surged from the soles of Doflamingo's feet and rushed straight to his tailbone. An unprecedented sense of death threat instantly invaded his brain. You were looking for death. Doflamingo shuddered all over, gritted his teeth, and roared angrily. If he was hit by this punch head-on, he would definitely die. Feeling the majestic wind and waves coming towards him, Doflamingo had such a thought in his mind. Block. Must block it. The moment the thought flashed through his mind, the silk thread connecting his fingers was directly cut off by him, and his hands with bulging veins were hooked up like chicken claws, grabbing forward heavily in midair. Swish. Hundreds of white silk threads gushed out instantly, densely forming a huge spider web, like a snow-white wall, stretching between Darren and Doflamingo. The end of the spider web deeply sank into the surrounding dozen buildings and the ground, forming an impeccable absolute defense. Spider web wall defense. A punch fell. Facing the spider web wall created by Doflamingo using the power of the devil fruit. Darren just kept a cold smile. Without any change of action. The strong wind made his black hair constantly disturbed, and the eyes under the hair were full of confidence and coldness that crushed everything. A punch like a landslide, with a strong and domineering speed and power, dragged a spiral of white air waves in the air and blasted towards the spider web wall built by silk threads. The moment the fist touched the spider web, the spider web wall, which was as strong and tough as metal, was stretched and deformed suddenly, and rushed towards Doflamingo in an exaggerated manner, without slowing down at all. Doflamingo's mind was shocked, and his eyes under the sunglasses were instantly filled with ferocious bloodshot. Damn bastard! How can I lose here? Boom! A majestic and domineering aura burst out from his body like a raging storm, spreading wildly in all directions. The sky and the earth suddenly changed color. The world in front of him seemed to suddenly turn black and white, and the shock from the depths of the soul swept across most of the town like waves. The four people of Trebol who were attacking Darren seemed to have received some invisible heavy blow, and their steps stopped uncontrollably. They stared at Doflamingo with shocked faces, their hearts surging. "It's the young master's aura. The spirit of the king. You are worthy of being Dover." Feeling the waves of impact, their souls and spirits were shaken and they almost couldn't stand steadily. Heroic hockey. The spirit of the king that only one person among millions of people can possess. It was because they witnessed Doflamingo's kingly spirit with their own eyes that they sincerely accepted this kid who was only 12 or 13 years old as their king, and bowed down to him. Under the threat of life and death, Doflamingo unconsciously burst out his own hockey. But before they could react, another more profound, majestic, dignified, and overbearing aura burst out at the same time. Boom! Torbal and the others widened their eyes in horror, their faces full of disbelief. The domineering aura. The same aura as the young master. No, this aura is even more frightening than the young master's. It felt like they were facing an iron-blooded emperor, or a Shira from purgatory, which made people feel submissive and fearful. The owner of this aura. Impossible. Diamante screamed in horror, and his face, which was covered with various colors of paint, turned pale. It's the Navy. That Navy. A Navy colonel in the North Sea, actually has the aura of a king. Boom. Accompanied by the screams of several of them, the two domineering auras collided violently in midair. Like a vast storm, each of them poured out madly from Darren and Doflamingo's bodies, crushing each other in midair. Compressed and expanded and compressed. Crackling. Black and red lightning suddenly exploded densely in the void, constantly appearing and disappearing. The storm carried countless bricks, soil, and dust, rising into the sky, stirring up the wind and clouds in the sky. The collision of the domineering color domineering. Trebol muttered with a pale face. Unconsciously, their bodies had completely lost their strength, and their brains were dizzy and they knelt on one knee, raising their arms with difficulty to block the strong wind. You actually have the same king qualifications as me. Doflamingo screamed with twisted facial muscles, unable to accept the scene in front of him. Darren sneered. Although Conqueror's hockey is rare, there are many strong men with Conqueror's hockey in the chaotic and dangerous New World. As soon as the voice fell, the muscles of the Marine Colonel's arms suddenly bulged, directly bursting through the military uniform. Under the second burst of power, the sleeves of the military uniform exploded into pieces, and the fist pressed down again. Continuously approaching Doflamingo. Conqueror's hockey has a tendency to suppress the latter. Damn it! Your Conqueror's hockey. How can it suppress me? Doflamingo's pupils trembled violently, and he roared crazily. The skin of his hands that controlled the silk thread burst, and exploded into blood mist. I am Don Quixote Doflamingo. The silk thread created by the thread fruit is extremely strong, even a swordsman cannot cut it, and no matter how strong the power of this navy is, it is impossible to break it. Can block it. Absolutely can block it. I am a noble Tianlong. I am targeting Tianlong people. A cold shout rang out, interrupting him without any hesitation. Darren stepped on the ground, and the land within a radius of 30 meters below his feet was directly shattered. Countless cracks formed the shape of a spider web, and then a large area of muddy waves exploded one after another. At the moment when the earth roared, he took advantage of the recoil force and burst out with all his strength. The terrifying force comparable to that of the giants was generated from the soles of his feet, and was transmitted upward along the spine. The body of the Navy colonel was like a bow that was stretched to the extreme, and the majestic power poured out from his fists. Crack. Tear. In the eyes of fear and shock of Trebol and others. Under Doflamingo's frozen expression of astonishment. The white spider web wall seemed to be hit by a meteorite. The center was directly sunken. And the dense silk threads of the spider web wall spread out, connecting everything. Large tracts of land. The walls of buildings. The main body of the small houses. Were forcibly pulled up. The power of Darren's punch was so strong that it overturned, more than a dozen buildings and large tracts of land. This exaggerated scene made Doflamingo shudder, and he felt an indescribable fear rising in his heart and hitting his throat. He did not break through his own silk thread defense. He directly overturned the object that fixed the silk thread. Bang! Before he could react, Darren's fist, which was still as powerful as ever, hit Doflamingo's belly directly. Although there were more than a dozen buildings and heavy land dragging him, the exaggerated power contained in it still exploded a circle of white air waves on the latter's back. Doflamingo's eyes turned white instantly, his bloodshot eyeballs squeezed out of his eye sockets, and his brain became blank. His body bent and arched in midair. Wow! A mouthful of blood spit out from his mouth. The next moment, Doflamingo was shot out like a cannonball, flying at high speed. He knocked away Treybol, who was kneeling on the ground. He crashed through the tall street lamp posts. He crashed through one house after another. He crashed through all obstacles on the flight path. After flying dozens of meters straight, his figure sank directly into a building. Accompanied by the shaking of the earth, the several-meter-high building let out a wail of being overwhelmed, and collapsed with a loud bang. At the same time, the back of Lubeck Island, a warship was docked on the coastline. Nearly 100 North Sea Navy soldiers were on full alert, waiting with a solemn and murderous look, the order from the superior. In the distance, countless civilians fled from the town in a panic under the leadership of a team of Navy. Report to Major Flying Squirrel, the civilians on the island have basically been evacuated. The cordon has been set up. A naval soldier saluted and reported to the Flying Squirrel standing on the roof of a building. The Flying Squirrel, who was observing the distance with a telescope, did not look back, but just waved his hand to indicate that he knew. He did not take his eyes off the telescope. At this time, a dull roar came from the distant town. The Flying Squirrel saw the billowing smoke roaring like a dragon from the telescope. He slowly put down the telescope, covering his forehead helplessly and painfully. This is too much. The corner of his mouth twitched. It's just like a father beating his son. Please everything, thank you very much. I have been feeling a little unwell these past 2 days. I just came back from the hospital today. I will try to update as much as possible from tomorrow. Well, different style, different story. But it is still the same old ma. Best wishes. Chapter 54 One Man at a Time. Boom boom. Through the telescope, he observed the buildings collapsing one after another in the ruins of the distant town, and the smoke and dust rising like a dragon dancing on the ground, and the muscles in the corners of the Flying Squirrel's eyes twitched. Even as his adjutant, the Flying Squirrel did not know what level of strength Darren had reached. But from the inhuman training he usually carried out day after day, the Flying Squirrel could infer that in the North Sea, except for a few big pirates, with nicknames who came here for various reasons, no one was Darren's opponent. The ability of the magnetic fruit gave him a large-scale attack and control method that was not inferior to that of natural ability users. As for close combat, except for Sakaski, who was still working in the North Sea, who could fight with Darren, the madman. At least the Flying Squirrel had never seen such a cruel person as Darren. When facing the enemy, once the target is determined, he will go all out and never give up until the goal is achieved, and he will never look back. And he is more cruel to himself than to the enemy. As for Doflamingo, the arrogant, paranoid, and sick kid, let him fend for himself, his life and death are in Darren's hands. Civilians have been evacuated, towns have been blocked, and it is impossible to pass on the news here. A former celestial dragon. Let him die. Anyway, he is not the first celestial dragon to die in the North Sea. The moment this thought came up, the Flying Squirrel suddenly seemed to realize something and woke up suddenly. I actually had such a disrespectful thought about the Supreme Celestial Dragon. Unconsciously, a layer of cold sweat oozed out of his back. The Flying Squirrel took a deep breath, smiled bitterly, and murmured in a low voice. Darren, you are right. 0 and 1, the meanings they represent, are indeed different. Lubeck Island. The center of the town. Boom. The buildings that were hit collapsed one after another, raising dust to the sky. The earth made a wail of being overwhelmed, transmitting a heart-pounding vibration. Click. The sound of a lighter sounded. Darren stood on a desolate, collapsed, cracked land, took out a cigar and lit it. The military uniform on his body had been tattered in the battle. He bit the cigar, simply unbuttoned the navy cloak, tore off the black tie, grabbed the tattered military uniform with one hand and pulled it hard. Tear. The uniform was torn open, revealing the naval captain's wild and explosive upper body. The sharp muscles were clearly defined, and they swelled and rose and fell rhythmically with every breath. The skin was covered with dense scars, and with his unruly and deep eyes, he looked like a wild beast. "Well, it's much more comfortable this way." Darren grinned. At this time, an angry and slow voice sounded. I say, how dare you?" Torvald, with blood flowing from the corner of his mouth, waved his cane, and disgusting mucus spurted out of the cane, suddenly sticking to the wreckage of a 4-meter-high civilian house, and dragged and threw it heavily towards Darren. Sticky meteor. The wreckage of the civilian house was thrown high up, and it made a dull humming sound while falling at high speed. The whistling wind blew in his face, blowing the cigar to suddenly ignite a red glow. Darren narrowed his eyes, raised his hand and gently waved to the left. In the wreckage of the residential building that hit him head-on, steel bars instantly penetrated from the inside of the building. Rip. The wreckage of the building was torn into two halves by the twisted steel in the middle, whizzing past Darren's left and right sides, plowing long grooves on the ground. Darren immediately raised his hand. Without anyone's command, thick steel bars and metals penetrated from the ground, constantly cutting, splitting, stretching, and lengthening like living things. Dozens of cold metal spikes hovered around Darren. Under Torvald's surprised eyes, he smiled and waved at the former. Swoosh. Dozens of metal spikes whistled out at the same time, instantly surpassing the speed of sound, and sank into Torvald's position at an incredibly amazing speed. Boom. The earth instantly raised rolling dust, and a large amount of mucus continued to splash under the penetration of the metal spikes. Darren then took a step, but his body suddenly shook. The ground in front of him suddenly fluttered, like a flag, like wild grass waving in the wind in the vast wilderness. He raised his eyebrows, and his sight instantly locked on a figure. Diamante, dressed as an Indian, half-crouched not far away with red hands, one hand pressed on the ground. Army flag. The ability of the fluttering fruit. It can turn the ground within a certain range around the ability user into a light and fluttering form like cloth and silk, making the ground like a large piece of cloth fluttering in the wind. It can make the opponent lose balance and fall, thereby making the opponent lose the ability to counterattack. And at the moment when Darren was standing unsteadily, a figure suddenly jumped high behind him. The boy wore sunglasses and had a blank expression. There was a piece of leftover steak on his beard, and his hands were tightly holding a handful of emerald green bamboo. Virgo. Ghost bamboo. Virgo's eyes turned cold, and the bamboo in his hand fell heavily on the back of Darren's head. Snap. The bamboo, which was as strong as steel, shattered with a sound, exploding into countless fragments. Virgo's pupils shrank instantly, and his heart beat wildly. This guy's body structure. Is he still a human? Before he could react, he felt a flash in front of his eyes, and the black-haired Navy had disappeared like a ghost. Buzz buzz buzz. The sound of air bursting suddenly exploded beside his ear. Virgo turned his head with difficulty. A shiny black military boot was rapidly enlarged in the reflection of his sunglasses. Boom. Virgo's figure flew out like a cannonball and directly sank into a building. The building then collapsed, causing a series of rumbling sounds. In the billowing smoke and dust, the face of the Navy colonel biting a cigar poked out from the smoke, and a long spear made of twisted and condensed metal suddenly pierced through the air. At a speed that Diamante could not react to at all, it directly penetrated into his abdomen, lifted his body away, and then deeply nailed into a wall. Diamante spit out a large pool of blood from his mouth. Under the severe pain, he looked at the Navy colonel with unprecedented fear in his eyes. Boom. At this time, a building next to it suddenly exploded, and the moving rock instantly expanded into a 20-meter-high rock giant, waving a huge fist with a diameter of 3 meters, and slammed down at Darren from a high position. "This is a great opportunity. You're dead." A sharp and piercing voice sounded. It was Pika. "I'll be grateful for everything. I've read the comments of the big guys. There are many controversies about Guion. Let me explain. In this timeline, Guion is only a teenager. He grew up in the headquarters and was spoiled by the big guys of the Navy. So his ideas are silly and naive. This is normal. It's like a college student who hasn't graduated yet. His eyes are clear and stupid. You can't expect him to be pragmatic. I also came from college, ha ha ha, it's just a joke. Not only her, but also Kuzan, who will appear soon. Kuzan in his youth, his justice is not lazy, but burning. My plot line for this book is very long, from the Roger era to the top, so each character has an obvious growth line, not the stereotyped impression of normal fan fiction. But please believe my level, I will try my best to write the style of each character. By the way, there will be more updates today. Chapter 55. Can we talk now? It was hard to imagine that Pika, a big, stupid guy, could have such a hilarious scream. A huge shadow rose up behind the Navy captain, completely covering him. However, Darren was not at all confused or flustered by the sneak attack. Instead, he stepped into the ground as if he had predicted it. As the rocks flew under his feet, the Navy captain turned around with a mocking sneer on his mouth, biting the cigar, and punched hard with his backhand. For Pika, who is good at strength, of course, he had to use stronger strength. To crush him. Only such a rough and wild fighting method can bring you the stimulation of punching. The next second, two fists of different sizes collided violently in the air like a meteor hitting the earth. Boom! As if an ancient bronze bell was struck heavily, the air around him suddenly generated ripples of air waves. However, this stalemate lasted only half a second. Under the gradually horrified, twisted and panicked face of the rock giant, the huge fist, arm, shoulder, and even the body of the giant made of rock all made crackling sounds. Countless cracks spread out from the point where Darren's fist landed, and finally covered the surface of the 20-meter-tall rock giant in an instant. The majestic power poured out from the fist of the naval colonel like the breath of a giant dragon. Boom! The body of the rock giant suddenly fell apart, turning into rubble all over the sky and scattered like a rain curtain. In the scattered rubble, the body Pika, wearing golden armor, was suspended in midair with a dazed look on his face, and he could not believe his eyes. Darren's figure suddenly disappeared from the spot. In the blink of an eye, he appeared above Pika. The black military boots were raised high, wrapped in white air waves, and headed towards Pika's head. Falling like a battle axe. Bang! Pika's whole body sank into the earth like a meteorite, and a huge vibration and roar exploded in the center of the town. The ground within 100 meters collapsed half a meter, and a huge dust and water column rushed into the sky. Super hit twisting whip. At this moment, a hoarse roar came from a distance. 100-meter-long silk thread suddenly fell from the sky. From a distance, it looked like a slash from the sky, slashing Darren in the air directly into the ground. The sharp thread sank into the ground, and violent vibrations continued to spread. A deep mark was cut into the ground in the middle of the street, and it collapsed towards the center. The buildings on both sides of the street tilted and collapsed with a rumble, raising a vast cloud of dust. 100 meters away. Doflamingo, covered in blood, struggled to crawl out of the ruins, staring at the center of the dust, panting, gritting his teeth, and blood couldn't stop oozing from the corners of his mouth. At this time, he had completely lost the arrogance when he first landed on Lubeck Island. The sunglasses were full of cracks and could break at any time. A head of short golden hair mixed with dirt and blood looked sticky. A large area of the ribs was sunken, and his face was as pale as a dead person. Did you succeed? Doflamingo's eyes under his sunglasses were fixed on the smoke-filled position in the distance, and he didn't care about the several cadres who were lying on the ground in a mess. Super Strike Whip was the strongest move he had at the moment. Its power was so great that it could easily cut a pirate ship in half from the center. Even if it was that monster, it was impossible. The moment this thought came to his mind, Doflamingo seemed to see some terrifying scene, and his bloodshot pupils shrank tightly into needles. As the thick smoke was gradually blown away by the strong wind, a tall figure that was looming slowly emerged. "Huh." Doflamingo heard a long exhalation. The slowly exhaled cigar smoke condensed into a flag in front of the terrifying figure. Footsteps were heard slowly. The first to step out of the thick smoke was a pair of black military boots. Then came a straight and slender foot. A body with sharp muscles and sharp corners. A handsome face with a cold and unruly look. The cigar in his mouth was still burning, flashing red light from time to time. There was a glaring blood mark on his chest, bleeding continuously. A sharp silk thread was firmly embedded in the flesh and blood, but it could not cut off the bones. "Well, it's interesting, it actually hurt me." Darren looked down at the silk thread that was obviously much thicker, reached out to wipe a handful of blood, and licked it at the corner of his mouth. Doflamingo suddenly felt that all the pores on his body stood up at this moment, and his body began to tremble uncontrollably. This guy smiled. He actually enjoyed the fun of fighting and getting hurt. "Well, that's enough fun." Darren casually pulled out the thread stuck in his flesh, twisted his neck, and looked up at Doflamingo, the blonde kid. With a hideous smile. His knees sank slightly. Push harder. Bang. Behind him, pieces of land and ruins collapsed at the same time, leaving huge fan-shaped grooves. Darren's figure was like a cannonball, shooting out from the spot at a speed that the naked eye could not catch at all. So fast. Too fast. Doflamingo's pupils shook violently. He only felt a flash in front of his eyes, and a fist had hit his abdomen heavily. Bang! Doflamingo bent over and vomited blood, his eyeballs about to burst. Bang! Another punch hit his chin from bottom to top. Snap! He heard the sound of his jawbone breaking. The figure rose up under the impact of this punch and flew into the air. The next moment, Darren's figure suddenly shot up from the ground, and in a blink of an eye he came to Doflamingo and kicked him. Bang! Doflamingo flew backwards horizontally. Before he landed, a knee hit him heavily from behind. So on the edge of the island in the distance, Flying Squirrel saw a scene that made his scalp numb through the telescope. The blonde kid with the noble, celestial dragon blood flowing in his body, like a ball, was repeatedly tortured, whipped, kneed, and elbowed by Darren in midair. Blood kept spurting out, looking extremely miserable. And around the ruined streets, the several seriously injured family cadres under Doflamingo were so scared that their faces turned pale, staring at the exaggerated scene in front of them in amazement. A full minute later, accompanied by Darren's volley, Doflamingo, whose skin and flesh were torn and bones were broken in at least 20 places, slammed heavily into the ground. Darren's figure also landed steadily. He flicked the ash of his cigar, bit the cigar again, and walked towards Doflamingo, who was twitching and looked like a bloody man. When he walked in front of Doflamingo, the latter was struggling to open his swollen eyelids. Darren stretched out his big hand, grabbed Doflamingo's head directly, and lifted the latter in the air. Let his eyes look at him. The setting sun pierced through the clouds after the rain, sprinkling a thin layer of blood on the world. In the mottled ruins surrounded by thick smoke, a 3-meter-tall Navy captain was holding a blonde kid covered in blood and only as tall as his waist. The dripping blood flowed from the latter's body and dripped onto the ground. Darren stared at Doflamingo, who was close to coma, and suddenly grinned. So, can we talk now? He paused, as if he remembered something, and added. By the way, I forgot to introduce myself, how rude. A puff of smoke blew out of the Navy colonel's mouth. My name is Rogers Darren, the highest commander of the North Sea Navy. Everyone calls me the King of the North Sea, but I like my other nickname more. Navy scum. I ask for everything, thank you very much. Please give a 5-star rating to those who like this book, thank you very much. Chapter 56 Dobby Doer. Burning will make everything in the world emit different smells. A piece of white paper is completely different from a wet tree. The smell of expensive wild boar meat and human flesh burning is similar, but the 10-year-old Doflamingo has not tasted meat for a long time. The flames rose before his eyes, and the dark night sky was illuminated by the blazing flames. Shouting, cursing, scolding, shouting, resentment, scolding. The explosion sound of the wall burning and cracking woke him up from the pain, and the noisy sound whistled by his side. His eyes were covered, and his body was tied to the city wall, as if he was a criminal being executed. It's the celestial dragon family. Don't kill them, let them live and suffer. Countless people stood under the city tower, shouting angrily at the Don Quixote family hanging on the city wall. They threw stones, rotten leaves, rotten eggs and garbage at the people on the city wall like raindrops. Doflamingo felt something sticky splashed on his face, and then flowed down. He heard his father's sad cry. What a irony, father! You gave up your noble identity as a celestial dragon, thinking that this was compassion and mercy, so you approached the common people and lived with them in peace and friendship. But did you see it? Oh no, your eyes were also covered and you couldn't see. But you could hear it, right? Their greedy breathing, their hideous laughter, their boiling desire. Father, these are the common people you always said you wanted to get close to. Did they thank you? No. What they saw was that the gods had stepped down from the altar. This is the stupidity of mankind, this is the inferiority of mankind. Who can resist the temptation to trample on the great God? They just want to step on the gods who have fallen into the ditch and spit on them. Are you crying? The flames gradually spread upwards, and the rolling heat licked the walls. He smelled the smell of barbecue. His feet were almost roasted. The curses continued. Countless rotten garbage was thrown from all directions. 2 lines of blood and tears oozed from Doflamingo's eyes. Listening to the overwhelming curses, he finally couldn't help but laughed out loud. Ying, I am a celestial dragon. The greatest existence in the world. Doflamingo roared furiously in his heart, gradually opening his cracked lips and revealing a defiant smile. Then I will kill you all. No one will be left. The scene suddenly changed. In the dilapidated room, the corners full of dirt and worry were filled with garbage and waste. Flies were flying around, and the warm sunlight outside the window could not shine into this damp and cold room. The hand that was tightly holding his own slowly fell weakly. Doflamingo was stunned, staring blankly at his mother lying motionless on the bed. His pupils seemed to have lost focus. The sobbing of Rocinante was heard beside him. I'm sorry, Dof. The father sitting in front of the bed whispered, his eyes red and his face haggard. I'm sorry. Will it work? Doflamingo suddenly laughed. He laughed crazily. He laughed until tears came out. It's all your fault, Ga, it's all your fault. He laughed crazily and took out a pistol. The muzzle was facing his father. If it weren't for you, my mother wouldn't have died of illness. If it weren't for you, our family would still be living happily in this world. If it weren't for you, I would still be a high-ranking celestial dragon. Don Quixote, homing ancient saint, looked at his own son who raised the gun, his face horrified, but he soon smiled with relief. The smile was gentle. Bang! The gun went off. The celestial dragon slowly fell to the ground, and a pool of blood gushed out. I'm sorry, Dov. He murmured. In his vision that was gradually stained red and blurred by blood. His own son. Crying and laughing. The picture kept flashing again. Under the silent pressure. A blonde child carried a bloody head and climbed up the snow-white and sacred stairs to heaven step by step. The head was still dripping with blood. The expression froze there, with a gentle smile. Soon he saw the 5 old figures. They stood above the clouds, overlooking the world like gods. This should have been my life. Doflamingo murmured in his heart. So he raised his biological father's head and said coldly to the 5 highest powers of the world government. I want to be a celestial dragon again. But what greeted him were 5 pairs of contemptuous, mocking, sarcastic, and indifferent eyes. Don Quixote family, are traitors. You are not qualified to continue living in the Holy Land. Go back. You are no longer a celestial dragon. Also, clean the stairway to heaven. Doflamingo finally cleaned the stairway to heaven. Then he boarded a merchant ship and came to the North Sea like a stray dog. Several hooligans and villains found him. They knelt before him. Listen, Dov, you are the king. No one who disobeys you will be allowed to exist. One day, you will become the king of this sea. Yes, I am the king. One day, I will become the king of this sea. I am Doflamingo. I will become the king of this sea. World government, 5 elders, celestial dragons. I will destroy this world and everything you rule. I want. Pa. A big hit made Doflamingo open his eyes suddenly and wake up from his sleep. His face was burning with pain. No, not just his face, there was no part of his body that didn't hurt. He was confused. I'm sorry, I don't want to disturb your dream, but you're too noisy. A low voice sounded. Doflamingo saw a black-haired marine, who was sitting with his legs crossed, biting a lit cigar, and shrugging helplessly at him. Add more, please support me, thank you. Chapter 57 Mingi's Training Plan. Doflamingo's pupils shrank and his heart beat wildly. This is. That marine. That North Sea Admiral. Rogers Darren. In his mind, the scene of this guy being as brutal as a beast and crushing all the people in their Don Quixote pirates appeared again, and a piercing chill came out of his spine. Don't be nervous, I have no ill intentions. Darren sat comfortably on the sofa, crossed his legs, and said while smoking. He saw a trace of hidden fear in Doflamingo's eyes, and couldn't help but smile. Sure enough, the disobedient kid still needs to be beaten before he will be sensible. Damn, no ill intentions. Doflamingo felt as if his heart was pierced by a sword when he heard this. His bloodshot eyes stared at Darren and gritted his teeth and said, "What do you want to do?" He glanced at the surrounding environment. This is a dark hall, with oil lamps hanging on the gray walls, casting shadowy light and shadow in the room, which looks extremely gloomy. The door of the hall was not closed, and there was a dilapidated courtyard outside. On the archway of the corridor leading to the courtyard, large pieces of rotten plaster walls peeled off, revealing damp bricks and stones. Dark doors were lined up on both sides of the hall, and there was darkness inside that could not be illuminated by lights. 4 cadres, Trebol, Diamante, Virgo and Pica, were lying in the corner of the hall. Their wounds were simply bandaged, their eyes were closed, and they were still in a coma. Seeing that his cadres were not in danger of life, Doflamingo secretly breathed a sigh of relief, raised his stubborn face, and said coldly, "Why don't you just kill me? I am a pirate, you are a navy. Don't you navy who claim to be righteous, regard the suppression of pirates as the highest honor? Kill you. No, 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 I said, I want to talk to you, and there is no malice." Darren pretended to be helpless and said, "It's just that you attacked me directly after a disagreement, so I had to defend myself." Doflamingo was so angry that he almost vomited blood. "Are you kidding me?" He had blue veins on his forehead and roared hideously. If it weren't for the pain all over his body that made him almost faint, and cold sweat oozing out of his body, he would have to fight this bastard navy again even if he couldn't beat him. Believe it or not. Darren shrugged. As for what you said, the navy is justice, pirates are evil. That concept is outdated. He looked at the old-fashioned, pale kid in front of him with a smile. I am a scum of the navy, justice, evil, or neutrality. These concepts are all worthless to me. From ancient times to the present, this world has followed a most basic law. Justice will prevail. Of course. Darren leaned forward, smiling at his arrogant and cold face as he approached Doflamingo. Because the winner is justice. It was deafening. Doflamingo's face turned pale, and he couldn't help shrinking back when he saw the crazy and ambitious eyes of the navy in front of him. But he soon realized his actions, gritted his teeth, straightened his chest, and met Darren's eyes fiercely. So, even if you are a scum of the navy, so what? You are still a navy, and this won't change anything. Kill if you want, do it, the weak don't even have the right to choose death. He stared at Darren without giving in, and even a cruel smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Darren smiled with satisfaction. He is indeed a promising talent. He stared at the blonde kid in front of him with admiration. He was only 12 or 13 years old, but there was a desire and ambition to destroy everything in his eyes. He couldn't help but compare Doflamingo with the protagonist of this world, Straw Hat Boy. 12-year-old Doflamingo. At this age, what is our destined child Straw Hat Luffy doing? He should be playing house games with his two good brothers, right? And what about Doflamingo? He has gathered a group of powerful, loyal and reliable subordinates, opened up new territory in the chaotic waters of the North Sea, and made his own a piece of sky. Extraordinary talent, the strength of the string fruit, the natural kingly spirit, and the identity of a celestial dragon. If he can control it properly and add fuel to the flames, Doflamingo should become a very useful card in his hand. At this moment, Doflamingo is like a rising meteor, bright and dazzling. As long as he pushes a little from behind, he will definitely ignite the world completely. Darren has a very clear plan for his future development. The identity of the Navy must not be easily abandoned. A powerful North Sea fleet that only obeys his orders is being established, not to mention the huge training resources that will be obtained after joining the officer training camp. Power, status, strength, subordinates. These things, it is something that being a pirate cannot give him. Although the matter of Celestial Dragon Shield Saint was successfully resolved by his smooth political skills, it also gave Darren a warning. This time he was lucky enough to get through. But what about the next time? What about the next time? Darren does not believe that he will never have any contact with celestial dragons from now on. It is only a matter of time before he breaks up with the world government. And he must not put all his investment in the Navy. Zeph in the original plot is the best negative example. For the word, righteousness, he fought for his whole life, devoted himself to it, and gave everything he had. But in the end, it was his three most proud and outstanding students who personally ordered, took action, and buried him. Therefore, Darren must develop a trump card outside the Navy that will make the world government and even the Navy headquarters afraid. And now, the answer is right in front of him. And the most important point is that Doflamingo at this moment is only 12 years old. His body has not yet matured, and his concept and understanding of the world have not yet been finalized. If it was the king of Dressrosa in the future, the 7 warlords of the sea, Darren would definitely kill him without a second thought. But the current Doflamingo is different. He is still young. This means, as long as he is stimulated and whipped, and trained, he will obey his orders. Thinking of this, Darren's face gradually showed a smile that made Doflamingo suddenly feel creepy. An intriguing smile. Doflamingo is very familiar with that smile. It was as if the little boy had found an interesting toy. He couldn't help but shudder. I ask for everything, thank you very much. Chapter 58 The Strong Never Complain. The wall lamps in the dilapidated hall flickered with flames, casting light down. In the eyes of the young Doflamingo, the Navy man sitting on the sofa with his legs crossed, his figure half illuminated by the light and half hidden in the shadow, with a sly smile. I have good news for you. Darren smiled and said. You will not die today, and neither will your men. You can even live better than anyone else. I just need us to have a simple chat. Doflamingo was stunned. This guy, is he serious? What do you want to talk about? His eyes flashed under his sunglasses, and he said in a hoarse voice. It is better to be alive than dead. Darren smiled with satisfaction when he saw Doflamingo cooperate. Please tell me, what is your ambition? You have the spirit of the Overlord, and you are a noble, celestial dragon, but you came to the North Sea, a sea where no one lives. What are you planning? Tell me, I want to hear the truth. The Navy captain stared at the blonde kid with bandages all over his body. If you want to raise a ferocious wolf, you must stimulate his desire for flesh and blood. Come on, Doflamingo. Doflamingo fell silent after hearing Darren's question. Pictures flashed through his mind. Flames, shouting, cursing, hospital beds, corpses, gunshots, heads, stairs to heaven. Listen, Dov, you are the king. Countless memories flashed like a revolving lantern, and finally gathered into a sentence full of resentment and anger. He suddenly raised his head and met Darren's gaze. Gnashing his teeth, he said stubbornly and fiercely, "I want to destroy this world." "Paw!" Darren slapped him and sent him flying several meters away. Doflamingo's body hit the mottled wall hard, leaving a big hole and large pieces of old lime peeling off. His face was visibly swollen, and he stared at the Navy, who suddenly attacked with disbelief. "What are you doing?" Doflamingo asked angrily. Darren looked down at him with a contemptuous and sarcastic look, and said lightly, "I am disappointed. I thought you could say something earth-shattering ambition, but I didn't expect it to be such a boring thing. Destroy the world. This world didn't provoke you. What do you know?" Doflamingo interrupted the captain with red eyes. He struggled to get up from the ground, and the wounds on his body opened again with his movements, and blood continued to ooze out. "When I was 10 years old, I had already seen the heaven and hell of this world." He stood with trembling legs, panting. The flames that spread to the city wall appeared again in his mind. Distorted faces were looming in the flames. They were cursing. "It was hot, too hot. I should have lived in heaven, standing above the clouds, looking down on the world. But because of the decision of my stupid father, my life fell from heaven to hell in an instant." As if the pain had brought back the nightmare hidden deep in his memory, Doflamingo roared in a somewhat inappropriate manner. Just a commoner, just a lowly person, dared to treat the great celestial dragons like pigs and dogs and throw them on the city wall. They burned us with fire, shot us with arrows, throw us with stones. They tried every way to torture us. He said, "What do you mean by, just like this?" Doflamingo stood there in a daze. Such a tortuous, miserable, tormenting life is so unworthy of mention in the mouth of this Navy. No. A surge of inexplicable violent anger hit his throat, and Doflamingo trembled and roared. "Isn't this enough? Because of my father's stupidity, our whole family is poor. I lost everything. I even rummaged through the trash can because of hunger. You don't know my past. No one else can have such a tortuous life like mine. Have you said enough?" Darren interrupted him coldly. He walked towards Doflamingo step by step, and the Gundam body cast a huge black shadow, completely covering the latter, who was only about 1.5 meters tall. "Do you think your life is miserable? Very tortuous. No one can compare with you," the Navy captain said with a sneer. "Isn't it?" Doflamingo gritted his teeth and retorted. Under the pressure of the Navy in front of him, he subconsciously took a step back. "I have seen many miserable lives, and I have seen many twists and turns in life. Believe me, Doflamingo," the sneer at the corner of the Navy colonel's mouth cracked wider, "there are many people who are more miserable and tortuous than you. In this area of the North Sea, gunshots are heard every day, the harbor and the coast are always floating with rotten and smelly corpses. I have seen people who sell their blood brothers for money, I have seen people who offer their wives for power, I have seen people who saw off their legs for a living, I have seen many, many different stories. I am tired of hearing them. But do you know? Even those miserable people who live a life worse than pigs and dogs, they don't cry and complain like you, like a woman. How old are you? 5 years old? Or 3 years old? Why don't you go home to your parents to feed you?" Darren looked down at Doflamingo, whose face was gradually turning pale, and his disdain in his eyes was undisguised. After the wolf was aroused, the first one to bite back would be its owner. At this time, it must be trampled on, tearing its self-esteem and destroying its wildness. Doflamingo clenched his fists, his eyes were red, and his teeth were clattering. "My mother died of illness. Then she is so lucky, at least she doesn't have to listen to your damn complaints anymore. After all, you are a spoiled young master and brat. If I'm not mistaken, when she was still alive, you probably heard the most complaints from her, right?" Darren sneered. "Or did your mother die of anger because of your complaints?" Doflamingo was stunned. He felt his face burning, as if he was slapped again. "You were looking for death." He roared like a beast and tried to hook his fingers. Bang! A fist had already hit his abdomen. Doflamingo bent over and hit the wall with his back. His eyeballs were full of blood and he spit out a large mouthful of blood. The strong never complain. Even ordinary people do better than you in this regard. Darren grabbed Doflamingo's collar with one hand, lifted him up in front of him, and sneered. I have never seen a strong man who keeps complaining about his miserable life all day long. With your ability, you want to destroy this world. Doflamingo bit his bloody teeth and struggled violently. Darren narrowed his eyes even more. It's almost time, the heat is getting better and better. Please give me everything, thank you very much. Chapter 59 The Devil's Whisper. You complain about everything, blame your father, what have you done? Darren mercilessly ridiculed and mocked. Looking at the blonde kid in front of him with blood oozing from the corner of his mouth and gradually becoming hideous, the barely visible smile in the depths of his half-closed eyes became more and more intense. Come on, say it. The greatest anger and hatred in your heart. Doflamingo clenched his fists tightly, his teeth clattering. What did I do? What did I do? He suddenly gritted his teeth and roared with red eyes. I killed my stupid father. The moment he said this, he seemed to have found an outlet for his emotions, and an uncontrollable hideous smile emerged on his face bit by bit. Ying. He laughed crazily. You can't imagine it. That feeling is so wonderful. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have suffered so much torture and misfortune. I didn't complain. I took action. I am a natural king. Ga. His eyes were filled with a strong desire to win, staring at the navy in front of him. You should see how desperate his eyes are. You should see how wonderful his expression is when I took out the gun and pointed it at him. Ying. Doflamingo laughed crazily, but tears like blood oozed from his eyes, and he screamed wildly. I swear to take back everything I have. I'm tired of the days in hell. I am a god who was born in heaven, why do I live in this hell on earth? Before he died, he was still saying sorry. But what's the use of an apology? An apology can't change anything. But if he dies, it can. So I shot him. I cut off his head, a bloody head. I carried it back to the holy land of Marihoa. I wanted him to see with his own eyes that I became a celestial dragon again and lived the life that should have belonged to me. Paw, paw, paw. A burst of applause suddenly sounded, which sounded extremely harsh in this dark hall. Doflamingo looked at the black-haired navy clapping in front of him in astonishment. So that's it. It's indeed a moving and ups and downs story. Darren clapped his hands, with a mocking arc on his face. This really makes me sympathize with him from the bottom of my heart. A stupid father, a gentle mother, and a rebellious and paranoid son. Well, let me guess, the happy ending of the story should be that the son kills his own father, proves himself, and finally regains the life he wants. Doflamingo was struck by lightning. Darren smiled. It's coming, you're going to collapse soon. Feel the despair. He half squatted down, stretched out his hand to rub the hair of the blonde kid, and smiled teasingly. So, did you get everything you wanted, Doflamingo? You killed your beloved father and even cruelly cut off his head. The world government should be very. Are you satisfied with your actions? Doflamingo stood there blankly, his lips moved, but he couldn't say a word. Darren smiled meaningfully and slowly approached the blonde boy. You held your father's head, as if you were carrying the spoils of victory. I guess you must have been very excited at that time, right? Perhaps in your imagination, the world government will pile up clusters of flowers along the way, play exciting music, and build a grand stage for you. Under the witness of the world, the arrogant natural king Don Quixote Doflamingo will ascend the throne of the celestial dragons again. He made an exaggerated gesture, and his voice gradually became lower, revealing an inexplicable magnetism. You desire from the bottom of your heart, you will climb the ladder of heaven step by step under the attention of thousands of people. You desire from the bottom of your heart, you will be praised and flattered, and the 5 elders will personally put on gorgeous clothes for you. You long from the bottom of your heart, you will become a celestial dragon again and live a good life again. The voice of the Marine colonel was like a cold nail, and like a sharp dagger, deeply inserted into the heart of the blonde boy. This is how you can prove that your father is wrong. This is how you can find a suitable reason to kill your father. This is how you can make the guilt and self-blame caused by patricide in your heart a little easier. With every word he said, Doflamingo's face turned paler. But none of this happened. You gambled everything, killed your father, endured self-blame and guilt, but in return you got cold eyes, contempt, and ridicule. There is no glorious return ceremony, no applause and flowers, no life of superiority. You, ambitious, brought the spoils of victory to the holy land of Marihoa, but were driven out like a wild dog in the end. I even heard that you humbly knelt on the stairs of heaven that day and wiped off the blood stains left on it. Enough. Doflamingo suddenly roared uncontrollably, his bloodshot eyes almost bulging out of his eye sockets. Stop talking. There were dense veins on his forehead. There was unspeakable resentment and anger in his eyes, like a blazing flame, wanting to completely burn the whole world. That's why I want to destroy this world. Well, the fire is enough. It's easier than I thought, and it collapsed like this. But that's right, he's only 12 years old. Since the wolf is completely hungry, then give it a target to hunt. A faint light flashed in Darren's eyes, and he smiled. No, 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 you are going in the wrong direction. Think about it, is it the world's fault that you have fallen into this situation today? He put his mouth close to Doflamingo's ear and persuaded him. You are a natural king. Is the king's magnanimity limited to venting anger on humble civilians? Trampling on the weak is meaningless. Doflamingo, think about it, who is the one who has brought you to this situation today? Is it your father? Maybe, but he is dead. Is it the civilians who tortured you? But they are also dead. Think carefully, who is it that makes you kneel on the ground like a stray dog, wipe the blood, and come to the North Sea, a place like this, in a desolate place? Think carefully, if you can take revenge, who will be the one you feel most satisfied with? Think carefully, if you have the opportunity at this moment, imagine boldly. Let some people kneel in front of you and beg for mercy, who would you choose? The captain's magnetic voice was like the devil of hell mumbling, exuding a soul-stirring temptation. Doflamingo was stunned. His blood-red eyes trembled violently, and his expression kept changing. Darren simply gave him the final blow. Think carefully, who do you want to be the most? Doflamingo was shocked. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Then, in Darren's satisfied eyes and smile. He was like a starving wolf, his eyes red, resentful, and crazy, roaring out these words from between his teeth. World government, 5 elders. Please give me everything. Thank you very much. Chapter 60 My Godson. Hatred is a very strange emotion. It is mixed with anger at unfair treatment and contains the impulse to destroy the target. This emotion will not weaken or disappear with the changes in time, place and space. The most terrible thing is that once the seeds of hatred are planted, no one can change them. This seed will continue to grow in a person's heart, take root and sprout, grow into a towering tree, and control a person's life from beginning to end. It will drive people to move forward madly, and in order to achieve this goal, at all costs. And now, the seeds have been planted. What kind of evil flowers will it grow in the heart of the Tianlong boy in front of him? Darren is looking forward to it. Very good, you finally see the truth of all this. Darren took a step back, staring at Doflamingo in front of him with burning eyes, his tone full of praise. Now, let's talk about how to help you achieve this goal. Doflamingo was stunned when he heard this, and quickly came to his senses. You want to help me? Of course, everyone in the North Sea knows that I, Rogers Darren, am a helpful navy. Darren replied with a smile, and took out a cigar and lit it. Doflamingo looked at the navy captain who was sitting on the sofa on the ground again, and suddenly said in a hoarse voice. Give me one. Darren looked at him in surprise, but he didn't refuse, and threw a cigar over. Doflamingo took it, skillfully cut off the top with the thread fruit, then bit it in his mouth and lit it, and took a big puff. The extremely skillful action made Darren's mouth twitch slightly. This is an old smoker. No matter how you look at it, a kid of 12 or 13 smoking a cigar in an old-fashioned way does look a bit confusing. Why are you helping me? After taking a few puffs of cigarettes, Doflamingo gradually calmed down, looked at Darren coldly with sunglasses and asked. You are a navy. The primary purpose of the Navy is to maintain the rule of the world government. He really has great potential. He got out of the collapse so quickly. Darren smiled and shrugged. I've said it before, I'm not an ordinary Navy. If I have to give a reason, it's that I can't stand the attitude of the world government and the celestial dragons. The Navy may be the facade of the world government, or it may be the watchdog of the world government. But I don't want to be a dog. Those celestial dragons think they are gods and born big men. Unfortunately, I refuse to be a puppet of big men. Doflamingo squinted and stared at Darren for a long time, and suddenly laughed sarcastically. I understand now. You want to use me as a gun to deal with the world government. Do you think I will believe you so easily? Darren grinned. Trust is not the basis of cooperation, but interests are. We have a common enemy, don't we? Doflamingo sneered. My request is not much. Even if you dare to kill a celestial dragon, not a deprived celestial dragon like me, but a real celestial dragon. He sneered confidently. I will recognize your ability, and even recognize you as my godfather in your North Sea way. Oh. Darren raised his eyebrows, his expression became strange. Are you sure you want to make this bet? Seeing the interesting smile in Darren's eyes, Doflamingo suddenly had a bad premonition in his heart, but he still gritted his teeth and said cruelly, that's right. He must not dare to attack the celestial dragons. Doflamingo is not a fool. He has collected information about this North Sea admiral. Greedy for money, deceiving superiors and subordinates, flattering, and eager for power. Such a person has no courage to attack the world noble celestial dragons. With this in mind, Doflamingo confidently straightened his chest and showed a cunning smile. And most importantly, even if he really dared to attack the celestial dragons, he would be retaliated by the world government, and this so-called agreement would naturally no longer be effective. You said that. Darren shook his head helplessly. To be honest, being your father is an extremely dangerous job. But it's a coincidence. He changed the subject and laughed playfully. I like danger very much. As he said that, he took out a fingernail-sized object from his arms and threw it in front of Doflamingo. The moment he saw the object, Doflamingo's pupils suddenly shrank into fine needles, and all the pores on his body stood up at this moment. A piercing chill surged from the soles of his feet, along his spine and up to his forehead, making his scalp numb. That thing. That is a chip. The identification chip of the world's noble celestial dragons. Doflamingo swore that he would never admit his mistake. Each celestial dragon family holds a celestial dragon identification chip. When a celestial dragon decides to give up its power, it must return the identification chip. However, if the identification chip is returned, it will lose the protection of the world government and the Navy. When his father decided to give up the rights of the celestial dragons and leave the Holy Land Marihoa with his family, the Holy Land asked them to return their celestial dragon identification chip. And he returned to the Holy Land with his father's head, which was in order to get back the chip that belongs to him. The chip cannot be forged or copied. Only the existence of the chip can prove the noble identity of the Tianlong people. It is the most important item that every Tianlong people will keep close to their bodies. But now Darren actually has a Tianlong identity chip in his hand. How is this possible? Could it be? Just as Doflamingo's heart was in turmoil, the deep voice of the Navy colonel slowly floated in the dark hall. A few days ago, the celestial dragon Shield Saint was unfortunately killed in the North Sea. According to the investigation team members' follow-up investigation, Shield Saint's official ship was defeated in an instant, leaving no effective clues, and even the surveillance Den Den Mushi on the ship did not capture the slightest trace. The members of the investigation team concluded that the celestial dragon Shield Saint died under the attack of Sea King creatures. It was an unfortunate accident. Darren blinked and smiled. Well, at least that's what the investigation report submitted to the government said. This identity chip was naturally touched out from Shield Saint's body. Doflamingo was stunned when he heard this, and a lot of information poured into his brain. He felt a chill on his forehead, and fear gradually filled his pupils. This madman, actually dared to attack the celestial dragons. And he escaped unscathed. So, he really dared to kill me. Doflamingo's mind was blank and buzzing. Darren sat up with a smile, and his upper body leaned forward slightly aggressively. As the face with a defiant smile kept getting closer, Doflamingo couldn't help but step back, and his throat rolled unconsciously. Do you understand now, Doflamingo? I can give you everything you want. Power, status, territory, military protection, industry, influence. But you have to understand one fact. The North Sea is my territory, and the rules here are the rules I set. As long as I don't allow it, no one can run wild here, not even the celestial dragons. Darren unscrupulously spit a dragon-like smoke at Doflamingo's face. Follow me, the North Sea military belongs to me, and the North Sea underworld. He pointed at the blonde kid's forehead. Belongs to you. Then. In the stunned eyes of the celestial dragon boy. The black-haired marine reached out and rubbed the latter's short golden hair. The flickering wall lamp flame cast a leaping, strange light and shadow on his face. Darren smiled and said, Welcome to the North Sea, my godson. Katakana middle dot katakana middle dot katakana middle dot. Note: the original plot of the Tianlongren proof chip exists, but it is not mentioned much. For more novels 96275 join. Chapter 61 North Sea Underworld, it's ours. Walking out of the dark hall, Darren relit a cigar and stretched his body. In the dilapidated courtyard, dead ivy covered the collapsed fountain. The night was sad, and the moonlight was cold and scattered. The figure of the flying squirrel stood in the shadow of the wall, motionless, without any sound, as if it had merged with the surrounding buildings. For a full hour, he did not move an inch, did not change his center of gravity. His face was cold and resolute. Darren felt that he did not even breathe, and was stationed here like a statue. Thank you for your hard work. A unique warm current flowed through Darren's heart, and he smiled and spoke. The North Sea is a very dangerous sea. He still clearly remembered how chaotic this sea was when he first crossed over. The mafia fought recklessly in towns and streets. Crying civilians trembled on the street corners, and the dignitaries of the kingdom were toasting at elegant banquets. There is no basic trust between people, only tricks, deception, betrayal. On the surface, they call you brothers and give you gifts with flattery, but turn around and stab you in the back. Darren, who struggled to climb up the road to power, could no longer remember how many people's blood his hands had stained. He always had many more enemies than friends. Even now, he is almost all-powerful in the North Sea, but he still lives cautiously every day. In this environment, it is indeed a blessing to have a trustworthy and reliable deputy around. The flying squirrel walked out of the shadows slowly, with a sullen smile on his face. You are cruel enough, he is just a 12-year-old kid. He naturally heard Darren's CPU to Doflamingo in the hall. Darren spread his hands and said, No matter how young the wolf is, it can easily tear open a person's throat. Don't forget that he is a man who killed his father at the age of 10 and awakened the Conqueror's Haki. The flying squirrel was also shocked when he heard this. Silence. He glanced at the chip Darren was playing with, looked at the gloomy hall with some concern, and asked, Aren't you afraid that he will stab you in the back? He dares not, there is no evidence, and no one will believe him. Darren smiled. Besides, I am his godfather now. The flying squirrel rolled his eyes. The father died and the son laughed. This happened to Doflamingo. But he also knew Darren's temper. This ambitious North Sea Supreme Commander has crazy blood in his bones. He likes the kind of thrilling danger that puts himself on the tightrope on the edge of the cliff. It seems that only this kind of suffocating tension and the heart almost stops beating can make him truly feel the feeling of being alive. By the way, has the news of this matter been blocked? Darren suddenly asked as if he remembered something. The flying squirrel nodded carefully. At that time, the cordon had been set up and the civilians were completely evacuated. Even the North Sea Navy that followed us out to sea did not know the specific details. They only knew that this was a mission to defeat pirates. Darren laughed. That's good, let's keep it a secret for as long as possible. It's time for us to go back. If I remember correctly, we have an appointment with Vinsmoke Judge tomorrow. The flying squirrel said in a deep voice. Yes, the first batch of high-tech weapon samples of Germa has been manufactured, and you need to go there in person to take a look and conduct the first test. The specific meeting place is waiting for Vinsmoke Judge's reply. Darren nodded and took a step. The wide cloak of justice behind him danced wildly in the air. Very good, so our North Sea Fleet plan has officially begun. Under the night sky, his eyes were brighter than the stars. In the dark hall, the dusty glass windows on the dome cast the cold moonlight, which fell on Doflamingo like silver light. The wall lamp was still burning tenaciously, lingering with light and shadow. The blond boy sat on the soft sofa, holding a burnt cigar in his hand, his head tilted back, staring at the high dome with eyes that had lost focus. Dover. Young master. It was unknown how long it took before Torebel and the other four slowly woke up from their coma. They first glanced around in horror, and only breathed a sigh of relief after finding no trace of the Navy. Dover, I said, why are we back? Torebel stood up with difficulty, supporting his cane with one hand. He was panting slightly, and his face was extremely pale due to the heavy injuries on his body. I don't know. I was already here when I woke up. If I'm not mistaken. Doflamingo was still staring at the moon on the dome, and suddenly grinned. It should be Rogers Darren who sent us back. When these words came out, the four people of Torebel took a breath of cold air, and a layer of cold sweat oozed out of their backs. This place is located on Mignon Island, and this long-abandoned villa is the secret base of their Don Quixote family. Only a few of them know about it. But now, the highest commander of the North Sea Navy has sent all of them back in a coma. What does this mean? All their previous actions in the North Sea have long been targeted by the powerful monster-like Navy. In a trance, they felt that this secret base had become unsafe. It seemed that in the dark corridors and gloomy rooms, there were some invisible and terrifying monsters hiding, observing them in secret. Then young master, what should we do next? Diamante asked anxiously. Since they set out to sea, they have been smooth sailing all the way, and have never encountered such heavy setbacks and blows. They have long been accustomed to others kneeling and begging for mercy in front of them, and accustomed to giving orders. But now, the Navy named Rogers Darren is like an insurmountable towering wall, standing in their way to conquer the North Sea. With just one person, he easily killed their more than 1,000 subordinates. And none of them could match Darren in front of him. That man is as powerful as Shura. It makes people afraid and desperate. What should I do? Doflamingo muttered to himself, and his pupils finally focused again. He turned his head and met the worried and frightened eyes of Trebol and others, and was silent for a long time. I have lost all my family members, and I only have you. Such a thought flashed through Doflamingo's mind. The moment the thought came up, an unspeakable bitterness also surged into his heart. He suddenly understood why Darren spared the lives of Torebel and others. So that's it. You were really cruel. So, Darren, in your eyes, everything I did was as childish as a child playing house, right? Don't worry. Doflamingo sighed in his heart, but smiled on his face. The North Sea Mafia is ours now. Under the increasingly surprised eyes of Torebel and the other four. The blond boy stood up from the sofa and laughed loudly, Ga. From today on, Rogers Darren is the godfather of my Don Quixote Doflamingo. Ying. The laughter, which gradually became hideous and crazy, continued to echo in this gloomy courtyard. Please give me everything, and 5 points of praise. I have bronchitis and cough recently, so everyone should pay attention to their health. In addition, I wish the college entrance examination students a successful start. Best wishes. Chapter 62 Meeting. The next day. In the North Sea, the waters near an independent island. The sky is clear and the sea is blue. White seagulls fly freely in the cloudless sky, sweeping towards the distant skyline. A warship is sailing slowly, dragging a long white wake on the sea. How long will it take? Darren stood at the bow of the warship, his arms folded across his chest, a lit cigar in his mouth, and his flawless white cape fluttering in the wind behind him. It's estimated that we'll have to sail for a few minutes to reach the agreed location. The flying squirrel standing beside him held a permanent pointer in his hand to identify the direction. Germa 66 has always been erratic, and the Army of Evil is a mobile war country without a fixed territory. Darren nodded, turned his head and glanced at the far end of the deck. Seeing the two young figures sweating profusely, he suddenly smiled. Noticing his eyes, the flying squirrel smiled bitterly and said, "Major Guillaume and Major Kaji should have been stimulated. They seem to have gone crazy recently and have been practicing day and night. This is a good thing. At least my ears are much quieter." Darren said lightly. The Celestial Dragon incident was a great stimulus to the two, chosen ones, from the headquarters. The powerlessness of the Navy itself, the despair in the face of power, the self-blame and guilt of helping the tyrant. These are enough to easily defeat the inner beliefs of a Navy. In the O'Hara incident in the original plot, Kuzan was the best example. From burning righteousness to lazy righteousness, didn't Kuzan personally experience the paleness and powerlessness of the Navy's righteousness? Maybe. You go and talk to them. The expression on the flying squirrel's face looked like he wanted to say something but stopped, and finally he couldn't help but speak tentatively. He had seen Darren's brainwashing ability to seduce people with his own eyes. With his insight and understanding of human nature, he can always point out the truth of the matter. Leave the preaching to the old man Zhang Guo, I have no interest in taking care of children. Darren withdrew his gaze from Guillaume and the other man, and said lightly. If they can't even get past this level, maybe they are not suitable to be in the Navy at all. Flying Squirrel was silent for a moment, and finally sighed helplessly. This guy really sees too clearly. But because he sees too clearly, he sometimes appears cold and ruthless. We're here. Just as the flying squirrel's thoughts were flying, Darren's deep and powerful voice suddenly sounded. The flying squirrel immediately came back to his senses and looked up. On the sea in the distance, huge shadows gradually emerged from the sea fog. The warships towed by the giant snail plowed long white marks on the sea, with a solemn and domineering momentum. The battle flag of Germa 66 fluttered on the top of the warship. On the leading main battleship, a Cross Eagle flag representing the Vinsmoke family stood proudly at the highest point. The dense fleet quickly closed up with the orders of the main battleship. The metal tracks and gears combined with each other, making a dull roar. In less than 3 minutes, dozens of warships were combined into a huge country. Germa 66. It's really worthy of being Germa 66, a country of war that makes the world tremble. The flying squirrel's eyes lit up, and he couldn't help but sigh in admiration. Darren nodded in agreement. Although Germa 66 was vulnerable in front of him, that was because his devil fruit ability completely defeated their technological strength, which did not mean that Germa 66 was weak. In fact, the military strength of Germa 66 was at the forefront even in the whole world. High-tech weapons, combat uniforms, clones who were not afraid of death, freely combined national territories. And the ability to fight across the Red Earth continent. If he could get all these military technologies and apply them to his North Sea fleet, then he would have a powerful military combat team that could fight across the Red Earth continent and easily enter the Great Line and even the New World from the North Sea. Of course, what he wanted to get from Vinsmoke Judge was far more than that. Take over the strings. With his eyes flashing with a deep and dark light, Darren gave the order in a calm voice. So the flying squirrel raised his hand and made a military gesture, and the Navy at all levels on the warship quickly took their positions. The rudder turned, and the warship sailed smoothly into the port of the Germa kingdom. Guillaume and Kaji also stopped their respective training at this time, tidied their military uniforms, and walked to the front of the army. They looked at Darren's broad and tall back shadow. Eyes are extremely complicated. Since General Sengoku left Batia Island, they didn't know what they felt. They were ashamed to face Darren and avoided him almost every day. At this time, bang 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 bang. Bursts of dull cannon sounded suddenly, interrupting the chaotic thoughts of Kaji and Guillaume. Bombardment. Kaji took a defensive posture with a vigilant look, took a step forward, and protected Guillaume behind him. Guillaume, don't worry, I will protect you. He spoke righteously, and just wanted to shake his hair handsomely, but found that the navy around him looked at him as if he was a fool. Kaji was stunned for a moment. Rows of colorful streamers rose into the sky, and countless silver flowers were scattered in the clear sky. The brilliant light cast mottled colors on his face, making him look like a clown. This is... Salute, salute. Kaji stared at the dazzling fireworks in the sky, his lips parted, unable to say a word. Don't be nervous, Major Kaji. Darren smiled and patted Kaji on the shoulder, then walked down from the warship first. On the land of the Kingdom of Germa, rows of salutes continued to rise into the sky, dyeing the world with the colors of liveliness and peace. Ha 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 ha. Welcome Admiral Darren to the Kingdom of Germa, it is really an honor for me, Germa 66. In a huge solemn army formation, Vinsmoke Judge, wearing a gorgeous robe and long golden hair, strode out and stretched out his hand to the Navy Colonel with a smile on his face. Sorry to bother you, the style of Germa 66 makes my heart surge no matter how many times I see it. Darren smiled and walked over. The two held their hands tightly in midair. Guillaume and Kaji watched this scene with trembling eyes. Seeing Darren and Vinsmoke Judge's enthusiastic smiles, they couldn't help but curse in their hearts, two cunning bastards. If they hadn't personally experienced the war that almost destroyed Germa, they would have thought that these two guys were brothers who had been separated for many years. Please thank you for everything. Chapter 63 You can't test the power like this. Germa Kingdom. Training ground. Irrelevant personnel have been completely cleared out, and the clone soldiers of Germa 66 formed a human wall, like cold sculptures, stationed around the training ground. The North Sea Navy's senior leaders, led by Darren, stood in the center of the training ground, watching the Germa soldiers carrying heavy sealed boxes and moving them to the training ground. According to our cooperation plan, this is the first batch of military technology weapons you want. Vinsmoke Judge said lightly, looking at Darren while speaking. Although it's just a sample, the overall performance is basically stable. As long as you pass the inspection, it can be mass-produced at any time. But I have to remind you that the cost of high-tech weapons is not cheap. Darren lit a cigar and waved his hand with a smile. Money is not a problem, open the box. Vinsmoke Judge waved to the clone soldiers, and the soldiers strode forward, tore off the seal, and opened the box. Darren and his group immediately looked around. Various types of technological weapons were placed horizontally in the wooden box, cushioned by dry straw. Vinsmoke Judge picked up a cannon-shaped weapon with smooth lines. Unlike ordinary heavy artillery, the barrel of this weapon was thin and long, with a metal cylinder connected to the end. This is a flamethrower, which can emit flames of about 300 degrees. The attack distance is 30 meters, and the continuous spray time is 15 minutes. It needs to be reloaded after the fuel is exhausted. He glanced at Darren and said, "Do you need to demonstrate the power?" Darren made a, "Please," gesture. Vinsmoke Judge shouted coldly, "Step out." Soon, a clone soldier wearing sunglasses strode out of the crowd, with his hands behind his back, standing in the center of the training ground like a rock. Seeing this scene, Guillaume and Kaji's pupils shrank slightly. This guy, isn't he going to use his own subordinates to test the power of the weapon? As if to confirm their thoughts, Vinsmoke Judge raised the muzzle of the flamethrower and aimed it at the clone soldier from a distance of 15 meters. The next second, he pulled the trigger expressionlessly and without blinking. Roar! A hot fire tornado suddenly sprayed out, instantly submerging the clone soldier. Under the numbing gaze of Kaji and Guillaume, the clone soldier became a fireman under the burning flames. There was no wailing, no struggle, and even his body did not tremble at all. In less than 5 seconds, the fireman slowly fell down. The flames lingered endlessly, smoke came out of the rotting corpse, and the embers gradually extinguished. The smell of burnt feathers filled the training ground. Kaji's face was pale. Guillaume felt nauseous. It's not that they haven't experienced war. But Vinsmoke Judge's cruel method of using his subordinates as weapons tests was something they had never seen before. Smoke lingered. Vinsmoke Judge put down the flamethrower, turned around and looked at the Navy captain proudly. "How is it?" Darren frowned. 300 degrees. The temperature of the flame depends on the fuel in the combustion aid. The density of the agent, air, is probably between hundreds and thousands of degrees. But that is based on real-world data. In the world of One Piece, where the technology tree is crooked, due to the lack of high-concentration fuel, the normal flame temperature is generally in the range of 200 to 900 degrees. Limited by the world setting, this is also the limit temperature of the flame fruit. The temperature of magma is between 900 and 1400 degrees, so the magma fruit is the superior of the flame fruit. The attack frequency is average, the attack range is average, and fuel needs to be added. As for the power, Darren shook his head and looked at Vinsmoke Judge and said, "You can't test the power of this thing at all. Researching and manufacturing weapons is your strength, but killing is another matter. For normal human flesh, there is not much difference between a bullet, a dagger, and a club to kill a person." At this point, Darren smiled. "Unfortunately, I am quite knowledgeable about killing." Vinsmoke Judge was stunned, and then said dissatisfiedly, "What do you mean?" Darren stepped forward, raised his hand to remove the black tie on the collar of his military uniform, took off the flawless white cloak of justice, took off the upper body of the military uniform, and revealed his scarred body. Seeing his actions, both Gion and Kaji showed surprised and shocked expressions. This guy, could it be that he wants to? The flying squirrel covered his face in pain. Vinsmoke Judge was also staring blankly at the wild and violent Navy captain, and was a little overwhelmed for a moment. Darren twisted his neck, making a crackling sound like frying beans, and then smiled grimly. "Come, use me to test it." As soon as the voice fell, a gust of wind swept through the training ground, blowing the Navy's black hair flying, and his eyes became more and more crazy. "Are you serious?" Vinsmoke Judge asked with a twitch in the corner of his eye. Kaji also reacted suddenly and jumped out anxiously. Hey, Darren, this is not a joke, that's a 300-degree flame. If you are burned to death, the position of the North Sea Admiral will be my turn. Oh no, I let it slip." He quickly covered his mouth. Darren suddenly realized, and said, "Well, Major Kaji is right. In this case, I won't take the risk. This glorious mission will be handed over to the genius from the headquarters. Major Kaji." He stretched out his big hand and grabbed Kaji's neck. No, you should do it." Kaji immediately shrank back at an unprecedented speed, sweating profusely. After enough jokes, Darren looked at Vinsmoke Judge again and said seriously, "I'm serious." He was indeed serious. Darren has trained his physique to the point where he can withstand bullets and small and medium-sized artillery shells. He can withstand the impact heat generated by the explosion of artillery shells, so this 300-degree flamethrower should not be too dangerous. The most important thing is that he has the talent of perception, and can clearly judge the destructive power of weapons by facing the attack directly. After all, the ultimate goal of the fleet he wanted to build was not to fight in the North Sea. In his conception, the military force under his command must at least have the combat power level of the New World pirates. Then naturally, the weapons equipped by this fleet must also reach a certain level of power. Seeing Darren's insistence, Vinsmoke Judge no longer hesitated and pulled the trigger directly at him. Roar! In the tightly contracted pupils of Kaji and Gion, a long tongue of fire shot out from the jet and directly enveloped Darren's upper body. The rolling heat wave rushed in, and a hot wind suddenly rolled up in the training ground. Everyone present looked at the man who was bathed in red flames and stood firm, and their expressions looked like they had seen a ghost. "Please everything, thank you very much. Chapter 64 My child, please forgive me." Crackling. The flames rose up, and from a distance Darren's upper body had turned into a ball of fire. The flying flames twisted the air around him, and Gion and others were terrified. It took a full minute for Vinsmoke Judge to slowly put down the flamethrower. What he didn't even notice was that a layer of fine cold sweat had seeped out of his forehead at some point. The smoke rolled, covering his vision. Gurgle. Kaji swallowed unconsciously and said to the flying squirrel next to him in a low voice. "Hey, that guy won't be burned to death directly, right?" The flying squirrel rolled his eyes unhappily. At this moment, a faint voice came from the center of the smoke. Well, the power is not bad. A gust of wind blew away the black smoke, and everyone looked with wide eyes, only to see Darren standing on a piece of land with flames flying, looking down at his body. His body was covered with a layer of black ash, and the charred burn marks were faintly visible. But from his appearance it can be seen from the situation that the injury is not serious. Well, at least not for him. Flamethrower, passed the test. Darren patted the ashes on his skin and grinned at Vinsmoke Judge. Next. He turned his eyes to Kaji and others. Don't be idle, come and test together, don't waste time. So the most thrilling and horrifying test in the history of weapons manufacturing began. Flamethrower. Thousands of volts of high-voltage current gun. Portable rocket launcher. High-speed cutting wheel. Continuous heavy machine gun. The various technological weapons produced by Germa 66 were vented on the body of the naval colonel like a bombardment. The entire training ground was filled with dull roars, sharp cutting sounds and huge explosions, and from time to time, Kaji's cunning laughter. Everyone, including Vinsmoke Judge, went from being dumbfounded at first to getting used to it, and finally even entering a state of numbness. After half an hour, Kaji and others panted and put down the last weapon, sitting on the ground without any posture. They looked at Darren with disbelief in their eyes. Monster. Vinsmoke Judge raised his hand to wipe the sweat from his forehead, and couldn't help but muttered with a pale face. Darren sat on a box of weapons with a satisfied look, biting a lit cigar in his mouth. A military doctor accompanying him was bandaging and treating his wounds. Very good, let's produce according to the weapons just determined. The deposit is 50%, and the balance will be paid after receiving the goods. Darren smiled at Vinsmoke Judge. Vinsmoke Judge said hoarsely. No problem. At this time, he had clearly realized how terrifying the North Sea Navy's highest commander was. After the accompanying military doctor finished bandaging, Darren slowly stood up, put on the military uniform handed over by Flying Squirrel, put on the snow-white cloak of justice, walked slowly to Vinsmoke Judge's side, and lowered his voice. In addition, about the problem of warship transformation. Vinsmoke Judge looked embarrassed. Your requirements are too high. If metal is used to replace the keel of the warship, the weight of the warship will at least double the original weight. In this way, the draft of the warship may be. Darren waved his hand disapprovingly. No, you don't need to care about the draft. His deep black eyes flashed with a strange and fierce ambition. What I need is that the main structure of the warship must be made of light metal. Vinsmoke Judge frowned and said thoughtfully. If that's the case, there should be no problem in mixing a small amount of alloy used to make combat uniforms into steel. But in terms of funds, he glanced at Darren, it's definitely an astronomical figure. That's what I want. Darren laughed. Money is just a pile of waste paper if it's kept in your hands. Only when you spend it and actually use it to improve your own strength is the kingly way. The warship set sail and slowly left the port of the Kingdom of Germa. Vinsmoke Judge stood on the land and waved to the warship that was going away with a smile on his face. Until the warship disappeared at the end of the sea in the distance, the smile on his face gradually became cold and ferocious. Master, the deposit of the North Sea Navy has been put into the safe. A middle-aged man dressed as a butler came over respectfully and whispered. Vinsmoke Judge nodded grimly. He did not speak, but waved his hand to let the butler leave, and walked alone towards the main castle of the Germa kingdom. Vinsmoke Judge passed through the heavily guarded main castle building gate and entered a heavily guarded passage. At the end of the passage was a metal door. He walked forward, his eyes fixed on the electronic panel on the metal door, and reached out to press the guard of the door. Iris verification passed, blood verification passed, welcome back, Master. A cold electronic voice without any emotion sounded. The door opened and Vinsmoke Judge strode in. Behind the metal door was a laboratory as big as several footballs. Rows of huge test tubes were displayed in front of him, slowly turning with the operation of the machine. The 3-meter-high giant test tube was filled with green liquid, and human bodies were floating in the liquid. It was a clone soldier of Germa. Vinsmoke Judge stood in front of a silver console, staring at the rotating green test tube expressionlessly. Suddenly, he punched the console hard. Bang! Damn it! He screamed with gritted teeth, his eyes were filled with dense bloodshot, and his expression was hideous and distorted. Shame! What a shame! He gasped, his chest heaved, and his eyes almost spewed fire. I thought that my great king of the Germa kingdom, the supreme commander of the evil army, has now become a lowly and humble arms dealer. He Rogers Darren, did he really think that the Germa kingdom was his arms supplier? He even had the idea of combat uniforms. Exclamation mark quote. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Vinsmoke Judge roared continuously, punching out one punch after another, leaving clear fist marks on the metal panel console. His bloodshot eyes stared at the rows of clone soldiers in the making, his face full of unwillingness. He was extremely angry. It was said to be a weapons test, just now, but Vinsmoke Judge knew that it was a warning from Darren, the bastard. He was going to show his strength with a crushing and strong attitude. Vinsmoke Judge gasped, and his vicious eyes kept scanning the experiment. Clone soldiers. The number of people is simply meaningless to that guy. The combat suits that Germa is proud of. All kinds of high-tech weapons. Were perfectly restrained by that guy's devil fruit ability. Rogers Darren's ferocious look when he was experimenting with weapons was simply a monster. Monster. Is there any way to deal with monsters? A touch of despair surged into Vinsmoke Judge's eyes. Is it really? Is there really no way to fight that guy? At this time, a call suddenly sounded from the microphone. Master, Madame Sora's water broke and she is about to give birth. Please come over. Vinsmoke Judge was stunned. Sora, that's his wife. His wife is pregnant and is about to give birth. And he, the king of Germa, will also welcome his first blood. A rare tenderness appeared on Vinsmoke Judge's cruel face. My blood. He whispered softly. My blood. He was suddenly struck by lightning. The next second. Ha 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 ha. So that's it. I found a way to deal with you. Darren. Vinsmoke Judge suddenly laughed crazily. Bloodline factor. Transformation. I should have thought of it a long time ago. Only monsters can deal with monsters. As if he had grabbed the last straw, he stumbled to the other side of the laboratory like crazy and grabbed a pink test tube. The transparent test tube filled with pink liquid reflected his increasingly crazy face. My child, please forgive me. This is for the glory of Germa. He hissed. Katakana middle dot katakana middle dot katakana middle dot. Add more, please do everything, thank you very much. Chapter 65 Vinsmoke Reiju. Vinsmoke Judge's almost crazy muttering slowly echoed in the cold laboratory. Only monsters can fight monsters. His bloodshot eyes stared at the test tube filled with pink liquid in his hand, but his mind kept recalling the scene of the Navy relying on its own physical defense and remaining unscathed under the hail of bullets. Skin enhancement. No, just skin and flesh are far from being able to achieve this level. Invulnerable defense, strong body recovery, and beast-like strength. Yes, only exoskeleton can do this. While he was muttering, his eyes flashed with a strange and crazy cold light, and he dialed the Den Den Mushi signal. Master, are you here? Madame Sora is calling your name. The delivery is about to begin. The housekeeper's extremely anxious voice came from the Den Den Mushi. Vinsmoke Judge gritted his teeth, his expression changing, and finally he made up his mind and roared. Tell the doctor to wait a little longer, I need some time. After saying that, he hung up the Den Den Mushi communication. Placing the pink liquid test tube carefully on the test bench, Vinsmoke Judge roughly swept all the instruments and other sundries on the operating table to the ground with one hand. Accompanied by the sound of crackling, he took out a pen and paper and calculated quickly. Blood factor ratio. Well, the exoskeleton alone is not enough, and toxicity must be added. Drops of cold sweat dripped down his cheeks and chin, but he didn't care. In 1 minute, the white paper was already filled with dense calculation formulas and drug mixing ratios. Let's start. Accompanied by his hoarse murmur, he pressed the button on the control panel. The various instruments on the laboratory table started to work quickly, constantly injecting various medicines and substances with determined proportions into the pink test tube. Soon the liquid in the test tube continued to boil, and a large number of bubbles emerged. Success. Seeing the instrument indicator light on the control panel showing green, Vinsmoke Judge clenched his fists, took the test tube from the laboratory table, strode out of the laboratory and rushed towards the palace. Walking through the corridors and palace gardens, Vinsmoke Judge heard painful wails the moment he entered the palace. That was his wife's voice. Sora. He murmured anxiously, quickened his pace and entered a bedroom decorated with luxurious and painted murals. Large pieces of white sheets were now stained with blood, and doctors and nurses in white coats were busy turning around. A beautiful and gentle woman was lying on a soft bed. The severe pain brought by childbirth made her tremble all over and sweat profusely. "Master, you are finally here." The doctor wearing frameless glasses stopped his movements and bowed to Vinsmoke Judge. Vinsmoke Judge waved his hand, walked quickly to the bed, and held his wife's hand tightly. "Sora, I'm here." Sora, the queen of the Germa kingdom, opened her eyelids with difficulty, a gentle smile appeared on her face, and she whispered softly. "Judge, Judge." Vinsmoke Judge saw his wife's painful expression and his heart tightened. He took a deep breath. "Sora, I have found a way to make Germa rise again and dominate the North Sea." He raised the test tube with pink liquid flowing in his hand. "Bloodline factor. With this technology, our children will have monster-like physical talents at birth. Our children will become the most powerful warriors in the history of Germa 66. The name of the Vinsmoke family will surely resound throughout this sea as they grow up," he said excitedly, looking forward to his wife's joy. But what he received was a pair of stunned and horrified eyes. "You want to train our children into weapons?" Queen Sora said in disbelief, her face pale. As the Queen of Germa, she knew very well what kind of disadvantages this technology, mastered by Vinsmoke Judge had. Just like the army of clone soldiers in Germa 66, those who applied this bloodline factor technology would lose all human emotions and could not disobey the orders of the head of the family, Vinsmoke Judge. Vinsmoke Judge was stunned when he heard this. "No, Sora." The fearful look his wife cast at him made him feel unprecedentedly strange, and he finally softened his heart and said, "I will keep our child's feelings. But our child will still become a weapon in your hands, right?" Vinsmoke Judge opened his mouth, but couldn't say a word of rebuttal. He fell silent. In his mind, the rebellious face of the North Sea Admiral still appeared again and again. "This is for the glory of Germa." His voice suddenly became cold, indifferent and strange. The head of the Vinsmoke family slowly stood up, turned his back to his beloved wife who was lying on the bed behind him in disappointment and tears, clenched his fists, and hoarsely said, "Only in this way can Germa dominate the North Sea again. I'm sorry, Sora," he murmured in a very soft voice. Then, amid his wife's crying, Vinsmoke Judge handed the pink test tube to the doctor, his bloodshot eyes flickering with grief, and he gritted his teeth and said, "Inject this test tube preparation to Madam, and then start the delivery." After saying this, he strode out of the bedroom without looking back. Half an hour later, standing outside the royal palace, Vinsmoke Judge, who was pacing impatiently and waiting silently, finally heard a beautiful baby cry. "Congratulations, sir, Madam has successfully given birth to a girl." The doctor in a white coat and a mask came out with a baby girl in his arms, covered in blood, and said respectfully to Vinsmoke Judge. Vinsmoke Judge was startled. He stared blankly at the baby girl in the doctor's arms, and subconsciously took it and held it in his arms. The long pink hair covering the right eye, the left eyebrow is a counterclockwise circle eyebrow, and the purple pupils look particularly clever. "But sir, the young lady's skin is extremely tough, and the needle can't penetrate it. I'm afraid she can't be vaccinated," the doctor said with some difficulty. Vinsmoke Judge was stunned at first, and then an indescribable ecstasy surged into his heart. Ha 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 ha. He couldn't help but burst into laughter, laughing crazily. The experiment succeeded. It really succeeded. She was born with a superhuman body. No, no need to be vaccinated. My daughter is a natural monster. Ha 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 ha. One day. In the North Sea Jerma Kingdom, the Vinsmoke family gave birth to the first royal descendant. The king of Jerma, the commander of the evil army, Vinsmoke Judge, named her Vinsmoke Reju. I went to a big hospital to see a specialist. It turned out that it was not bronchitis, but Yonghu's pneumonia. I was drunk. Take good care of yourself. Updates will be kept normal. If there are more updates, I can only say that I will try my best. Best wishes. Chapter 66 Special Training. Beihai. 321 Branch. The sun was blazing on the training ground, and the yellow sand was flying. Three figures with amazing momentum were attacking a black-haired navy standing in the center of the training ground. Their speed and strength had reached the extreme, and their coordination was almost perfect. Three snow-white cloaks representing the rank of major of the headquarters were constantly fluttering with the offensive of the three people. And the man they were besieging was wild and unruly, with his upper body naked, revealing his muscular figure like a knife and an axe. With a smile on his lips, he responded to the violent attack of the three people with ease. It was clearly Guillaume, Kaji and Flying Squirrel who were besieging Darren. However, although they had the advantage in numbers, Guillaume and the other two were covered with fine cold sweat on their foreheads, as if they were under great pressure. It was obviously them who launched the attack, but it felt like Darren was beating the three of them alone. Too weak, Kaji, didn't you eat? Your weak fists are just like tickling. Darren laughed mockingly, making the breathless Kaji furious. Darren, you bastard, what are you talking about? A sharp sound of breaking through the air came from behind, and the threatening feeling was infinitely close. Darren dodged the sword light of Flying Squirrel and Guillaume from behind, and said with a playful face. Isn't it soft and fluffy, can you do it, thin dog? While speaking, the naval colonel deliberately glanced at Kaji's crotch, and the deep meaning in his eyes was enough to make every bloody man furious. Darren, you are looking for death. I will fight you. Sure enough, the next second, Kaji's furious roar sounded on the training ground. I saw steaming hot air coming out of his body skin, white smoke coming out of his nostrils, and his figure rushed towards Darren like a wild bull. The explosive force of stepping on the ground even caused a huge pit with a diameter of more than 5 meters to explode on the ground. Kaji's speed suddenly climbed to the extreme, and he flew across the sky like a cannonball. Bang! A muffled sound. Kaji looked at Darren, who was hit in the face by his punch and raised his head high, in some surprise. Looking at the blood splattering, he was a little unable to react for a while. I actually hit him. But the next second, his pupils shrank instantly. Darren, who raised his head high, suddenly raised a happy grin from the corner of his mouth with a blood mark. Rather than the anger and pain of being hit and injured, he smiled like a fun toy. Very good strength. The paranoid and excited voice sounded slowly, and it sounded like the devil's whisper in Kaji's mind. The corner of his eye twitched, and a bad premonition surged in his heart. Could it be? Darren grinned. Bang! He hit Kaji's forehead directly and roughly. Blood splattered, and Jaji immediately felt dizzy. Before he could recover, a big hand wearing a black leather glove had been enlarging in his blurred vision. Don't hit my face. Jaji wailed. Darren ignored him, grabbed his face with one hand, lifted him up, and slammed him into the ground. Boom! The ground within a radius of 30 meters suddenly cracked with dense cracks, and the earth wailed under the heavy burden. The smoke and dust rolled, and Jaji's upper body had completely sunk into the ground. His two legs wearing clogs and covered with leg hair twitched in the air. Kang! At this moment, the sound of a saber clanging out of its sheath suddenly exploded. A shining saber first pierced through the surging smoke and dust, and then, brought out, the Flying Squirrel's face with a military cap and a resolute and calm face. The wide cloak fluttered behind him, the Flying Squirrel's eyes were stern, and he held the saber tightly in both hands, slashing at Darren. The perfect time. Swish! The saber with sword light slashed down sharply, cutting a large amount of blood on Darren's chest. Well, a lot of progress. There was a shocking blood mark on his chest, but Darren looked at the Flying Squirrel in front of him with admiration. The flying squirrel smiled bitterly and, calmly, welcomed Darren's powerful knee strike. Bang! His figure flew backwards like a cannonball, knocking down 3 human-shaped stone targets in succession, and then he landed in a mess, spitting blood. After a successful strike, Darren felt a touch of coldness approaching infinitely from the sky above his head. The sharp breath even made him feel a faint sense of pores standing up. As expected of a future candidate for the admiral, his talent in swordsmanship is indeed quite amazing. Darren murmured in his heart, smiling and reaching out with one hand. Clang! The golden sword suddenly slashed into Darren's palm, cutting through the black glove, but stuck there tightly, being tightly imprisoned by the latter. The fierce wind blew the smoke and dust into a mess. Guillaume's figure jumped high in the air, holding the sword with both hands, and took a stance. The cloak behind her was fluttered by the continuous burst of air waves, almost vertical to the ground. She looked at the naval colonel in front of her who was giving her a cynical smile, and suddenly burst into a low roar. The famous sword Jin Chen Pao Bu Qian Lan Nuo Luan Ba was unprecedentedly brilliant, and it was trying its best to resist Darren's inhuman strength, relying on the explosive force pressing down from top to bottom, and continued to cut down. That knife! It was just a little bit away from slashing the captain's chest. However, even if Guillaume used all his strength, he couldn't complete the final blow. In the end, even pressing down by 1 centimeter became so difficult, like a luxury. Darren no longer held back. The iron-like palm suddenly exerted force, and the collision between the fingers and the blade even made a crisp sound of metal clashing. He pulled it fiercely. In Joan, at the moment when Guillaume suddenly lost balance and was stunned, a fist hit her abdomen heavily. Bang! White air waves exploded on her back. Guillaume's face suddenly turned pale, and she slid down with powerlessness. She knelt on the ground with her hands covering her abdomen, and blood oozing from her mouth. Drip! The dazzling blood kept dripping from Darren's wounds to the ground, and was quickly absorbed by the dust on the training ground, forming a dark brown mark. A smile appeared on Darren's face, looking at Guillaume, Kaken flying squirrel who fell to the ground and gasped for breath. Well, let's stop today's training. Under the pain mask expressions of the 3 people, he blinked. Continue tomorrow. After saying that, he turned around and strode towards the base commander's office. Flying squirrel rubbed his temple in distress. Guillaume lay flat on the ground, gasping for breath, still holding the long sword tightly in his hand. Jiaji couldn't help but wail and cursed indignantly. Damn it! It has been half a month since the day when he went to the Germa kingdom to test weapons. Since that day, Darren, the bastard, dragged them to special training every day, under the pretext of helping them improve their strength. But Jiaji always felt that the bastard was bullying them in various ways. I'm grateful for everything. Chapter 67 Life is Simple. In the evening, the base director's office. Darren was still naked from the waist up, biting a lit cigar in his mouth, standing in front of the huge floor-to-ceiling glass window, overlooking the situation of the entire 321 branch from a high position. Warships were patrolling around the island on a fixed route. The figures of the Navy formations were looming on the school field, and bursts of shouting and hitting were heard from time to time. Navy soldiers in military uniforms were carrying out daily preparations and maintenance on the artillery and docked warships. The setting sun shone in from the French windows, reflecting on the tall figure of the Navy captain, casting a long shadow. The smoke shrouded his face, making his eyes look deeper. The progress of strength is indeed getting slower and slower. At a certain moment, Darren exhaled a puff of smoke and sighed helplessly. He looked down at the wounds on his palms and chest. The wounds have completely scabbed over, and it is estimated that they will be almost healed after a good sleep tomorrow. The superhuman physique has brought him strong defense and also greatly enhanced his own recovery. The previous, conventional, training has basically failed to improve his various data. In short, the body has completely adapted to this intensity of external pressure and stimulation. So after he came back from the Germa kingdom, he decided to take Flying Squirrel, Guillaume and Kaji for special training. On the one hand, it can help them realize their talents faster and improve their strength. On the other hand, it also puts new pressure and stimulation on himself. Although the three of them working together are far from enough to bring enough pressure to Darren, when fighting and sparring with them, the data of his body will eventually loosen and grow. Anyway, the talents of the three flying squirrels are among the best even in the entire ocean. Thinking of this, Darren gradually immersed himself in his mind, and through the talent of perception, he clearly understood his physical condition and obtained his own data panel. Physique, 61.753. Strength, 57.192. Speed, 59.241. Fruit, 72.111. In addition to the ability of the devil fruit, in the past month, the values of physique, strength and speed have increased by 0.50.8, but have been infinitely stagnant. Most of this is due to the special training with Kaji and the other three in the past 10 days. As for the development of the devil fruit, the progress is even slower. Knock, knock, knock. At this time, a gentle knock on the door suddenly sounded, interrupting Darren's meditation. "Come in," he replied softly. The door of the office was pushed open, and the flying squirrel, wearing a neat military uniform and a military cap, strode in. Darren poured a glass of iced whiskey and handed it to the flying squirrel, smiling. "How do you feel?" The flying squirrel took the glass and grinned bitterly. "Not very good. Not everyone is like a madman like you, who likes to enjoy the pleasure brought by fighting and pain." In the past 10 days of special training, he didn't sleep well at all. After finishing the special training every day, all the bones in his body seemed to fall apart. Even if he was lying in bed, his muscles were sore. Darren shrugged and smiled. "Pain is a good thing. It reminds you that you are alive. In the battle, using my own body to feel the opponent's attack can make me more clearly perceive the opponent's strength, speed, physique, and even will, so as to find flaws." The flying squirrel rolled his eyes unhappily. He picked up the wine glass and drank it all. Darren is like this. Many times, he can rely on his own speed and instant burst to avoid the opponent's attack. But he is often unwilling to do so. The rough and wild fighting style of his fight forms a sharp contrast with the flexibility, cunning and smoothness of his political skills. Between dodging and head-on collision, he always chooses the latter. This is the fighting style he has developed over the years, perhaps influenced by his former boss Sakazuki. Like to exchange injuries for injuries, and fight with the opponent at the most dangerous moment. This kind of person is the most difficult opponent you never want to meet. Like a crazy, hungry wolf. Even if the internal organs are crushed. Even if the hands and feet are broken. Before dying, he will grin and bite off a piece of meat from the opponent with the remaining sharp teeth. Hearing the squirrel's complaints, Darren smiled disapprovingly and refilled him with another glass of wine. It's not a good habit to dodge in battle. It will make you cowardly, timid, and indecisive. Once you form the habit of dodging in battle, you will subconsciously rely on it, and it will be easy for the enemy to predict your actions. If you are used to leaving a way out in battle, you may have a way out, but you will also lose the chance of winning. Habit of dodging is not a good thing for the growth of personal strength. Will, courage, determination to win, crisis between life and death. These are the biggest keys to improving combat power. After thinking about it, Darren couldn't help but add a sentence. On this sea, there is only one Borsellino. The weird face of the monster appeared in his mind, and even a serious flying squirrel couldn't help but twitch his mouth. He sighed and said with emotion. But every time you risk your life without leaving a way out, how many lives do you have to risk? Darren picked up the wine glass and took a sip. Who knows? His deep eyes drifted to the distant sea, the smoke of the cigar lingered around his flawless and cold profile, and his steady and powerful voice echoed in the empty office. But people only live once, I just want to live happily. I think life is actually very simple, either move forward or retreat. Retreat. Naturally not a problem. Even when it happened for the first time, you would hypocritically comfort yourself, it's okay, just endure it and it will pass. Just like this, hide first, and then find the place again, but in fact, there will be a second time after the first time. Retreat again and again, avoid again and again, compromise again and again. Can you still be the same person? There are too many reasons to retreat, and there is only one reason to move forward, but this one is enough. Darren's mouth gradually curled up a smile. I would rather die than lose. He clenched his fists. I want to win. The flying squirrel was silent. Listening to these meaningful words, he knew that Darren was not just talking about fighting. The meaning of these words is also a reflection of the choices Darren made countless times in the past. One step back, every step back. This is the case when fighting. This is the case when facing the world's leading military power, Germa 66. This is the case when facing the supreme power, the celestial dragons. The 4 words, endure in silence, have never been in Darren's life dictionary. Ask for everything, grateful. Chapter 68 Fair Game. After a long silence, the flying squirrel exhaled a long breath of turbid air. He looked at Darren's back standing in front of the French window again, and in a trance, he seemed to see the soul carried in the body of this navy, scum, in the mouths of the people. An unruly soul that always moves forward. Yes, it is because he is such a man. He will be the person he is willing to follow for life. Those 2 guys have made great progress recently. Darren suddenly changed the subject. His eyes moved to the distant training ground. The yellow sand was dancing in the training ground under the setting sun. In addition to the 321st Naval soldiers who were doing daily training, there were 2 figures that were particularly eye-catching. One stood on the left side of the training ground, holding a long sword, with his cloak fluttering behind him, holding his breath and concentrating, swinging the sword continuously. The golden sword was as wild as the wind, sweeping out brilliant light and shadows. With Darren's eyesight, he could clearly see that with the frenzy of the golden sword, countless sparks kept colliding and deriving on the edge of the blade. That was a bullet. It turned out that Guillaume was relying on his own swordsmanship practice to accurately cut the bullets shot from dozens of meters away in half one by one. On the other side of the training ground, Kaji, with a flushed face, was dragging a small abandoned warship with gritted teeth, dragging it forward with great difficulty. His muscles were tense and bulging, his veins were exposed and almost bursting, and he was still muttering. I'm not a thin dog. I'm not a thin dog. Flying Squirrel followed Darren's gaze and laughed. They are tortured by you and have a shadow. They keep talking about wanting to become stronger. They have indeed become much stronger, but they haven't realized this fact yet. While speaking, he glanced at Darren and added in his heart. After all, you are the one practicing with them. Darren smiled and said. Forget about Guillaume. She has always been a good student in the eyes of old man Zondwo. What I didn't expect was that this seemingly unreliable guy, Kaji, actually had such resilience. The flying squirrel agreed deeply. Major Kaji has extraordinary skills. After the special training every day, he would practice various projects on his own, and the amount of training seriously exceeded the standard. He was obviously the one who was hit the hardest by you during the special training, dragging a body of injuries, but he was always able to appear on the training ground full of energy and vitality the next day. He was ravaged by you dozens or hundreds of times, but he never got discouraged. No matter what happened, he had the courage to fight again and again. I have to admit that he is indeed admirable. Well, it's just that his focus is always weird. Weird. Darren raised his eyebrows and turned to look at the flying squirrel with some curiosity. The flying squirrel showed a helpless bitter smile on his face. Recently, there have been a lot of opinions in the branch, saying that Major Kaji appears in the female soldiers' dormitory too often. Darren. You are really worthy of it, Kaji. In fact, there is another thing that the flying squirrel did not dare to say, that is, Kaji often went to various aristocratic parties in the name of caring for the people, and finally came back in a mess, and he was still happy to do it. Darren shook his head and asked. How is that kid Dover recently? The flying squirrel's face became solemn, and he said in a deep voice. The progress is very fast. In just half a month, he has taken over 30% of the mafia territories and underground businesses in Beihai. The scale of the Don Quixote family has also surpassed the previous one, reaching a scale of nearly 2,000 people. Quote, Doflamingo is indeed very capable. He strongly suppressed the rebellious troublemakers, used the most bloody methods to intimidate, showed mercy to those who knelt and surrendered, and constantly gathered his subordinates. At the same time, he restrained his subordinates and tried his best to avoid causing harm to civilians. Quote, If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed that he was just a 12-year-old kid. And, his methods always remind me of another person. When he said the last sentence, his tone was extremely complicated. Who? You. Darren suddenly laughed. So, I did not make a mistake in choosing him as my godson. He shook his head and said. But there should be a, but, after your words, right? The flying squirrel was stunned when he heard it, and then smiled bitterly. Quote, I really can't hide anything from you. Darren took a sip of whiskey. Tell me about it. After all, this is the North Sea, and the underground world in this sea area is a tough nut to crack. Flying Squirrel said slowly. Yes, although the Don Quixote family's expansion momentum is very rapid, it is precisely because Doflamingo's rise is too rapid and too dazzling that the mafia forces entrenched in other territories in the North Sea have become vigilant. Under common pressure, they have torn up the agreement with our navy, constantly recruiting troops, frantically staging territorial disputes and bloodshed, trying to expand their own power to fight against the rise of the Don Quixote family. Darren narrowed his eyes. I thought they would be more competitive. Seeing his micro-expression, the flying squirrel's heart suddenly tightened. He knew someone was going to be unlucky. What do you mean? The Navy captain sneered. If they can put aside their prejudices and unite against the Don Quixote family, I will not interfere in this underground world power struggle. After all, they gave me enough respect. The rules of the game are fair. The Don Quixote family broke the rules of the North Sea, and I killed all of his thousands of men as a punishment. If he wants to become the overlord of the North Sea underground world, he must start from scratch, and I will not give him any help. He must prove his ability. Don Quixote family versus the entire North Sea underground forces, this is my idea. If he fails and can't even take the North Sea, it proves that he is just this level. But what I didn't expect is, the underground forces in the North Sea are too disappointing. They actually dared to tear up the agreement, break my rules, attack civilians, and plunder the territory in chaos. Darren narrowed his eyes even deeper. Quote, I am very unhappy. The flying squirrel took a deep breath. When do we set off? He didn't ask too many details and reasons. Because it's not important. Because in the North Sea, no one can disobey Darren's rules. As for the so-called fair game, there has never been a so-called truly fair game in the world. The dealer will also have to go out in person. It just means that the game will end in an instant. In the final analysis, in the North Sea, the so-called underground world is just a matter of Darren's words. Let's set off now, give my lovely godson a small gift. Darren pulled the military uniform off the hanger and put it on neatly. After all, I don't have much time left in the North Sea. The flying squirrel was startled. You have reached the bottleneck. He is those who probably know Darren's special talent also understand that the latter is trying to improve his physical limits through various hellish training. Darren nodded and admitted. Yes, I need a stronger opponent. It's no longer meaningful to stay in the North Sea. The Grand Line is the most exciting stage in this sea. The officer training camp of the Navy headquarters. There, he will compete with the elite navies from all over the world, will inherit the Admiral's legacy, master the superhuman skills of the Navy's 6 styles. And the most powerful ability in this sea. Domineering. While speaking, Darren has tied a black tie. He put on a large, white navy cloak. He said indifferently. Before I leave, completely unify the underground world of the North Sea. I ask for everything, thank you very much. I have been unwell recently, and the update time is not stable, but I will try my best to ensure normal updates. Chapter 69 Greetings. North Sea, Filbay Island. Late at night. Blood and flames reflected the sky red. Bang 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 bang. Boom boom. The roar of guns and cannons rang out violently on the street, and hundreds of Navy soldiers were attacking a mafia family's base. The thick smoke billowed, and the thick walls of the base were blown into shocking gaps by the artillery that followed one after another, and rocks flew everywhere. Damn Navy! Where did they get these weapons? A mafia cadre in a black suit crawled out from under the collapsed wall, his face covered in blood, and his eyes were red as he roared. As one of the most powerful mafia forces on Filbay Island, their Snooker family controlled more than half of the underground industries within hundreds of miles of the island, and their business scope included illegal businesses such as brewing, smuggling, gambling, and customs. They were able to call the shots in this sphere of influence, making a fortune every day, with hundreds of members under their command, and weapons such as muskets and explosives. Even some small and medium-sized pirate groups did not dare to provoke their Snooker family easily. But everything was in chaos in an instant. The prosperous, beautiful, and dreamy life was completely shattered and disillusioned in the roar of the explosion. An explosion woke York Snooker from his chaotic sleep. Countless attacks whizzed past his ears, and he couldn't even tell what the sound was. The family residence, arsenal, courtyard, conference room, chamber of commerce, earth, buildings, air. Everything was shaking. Under the continuous bombardment, the cadres of the Snooker family could not react at all and were directly buried in the ruins by the fierce firepower. York Snooker only felt his ears buzzing, and then became numb. He looked at the well-trained North Sea Navy with a dull face, holding various weapons, and methodically surrounded their family residence and crushed everything, and his heart was extremely frightened. High-temperature flamethrowers. Stun guns that spewed blue electric light. Portable machine guns. Even York Snooker saw a row of Navy officers carrying a rocket on their shoulders. Unprecedented cutting-edge weapons. Boom. A small portable missile suddenly exploded overhead, and the dome-shaped church building was instantly blown to pieces, leaving a mess. Amid the loud noise, a large number of stones broke into pieces and collapsed. A huge shadow suddenly flooded York Snooker from top to bottom. A touch of despair filled his eyes. Before being submerged by the boulder flow, he saw a Navy officer wearing wooden clogs and looking wretched, walking out of the crowd with his hands in his pockets, and then he lifted up a civilian building abruptly. Boom. The civilian buildings were thrown high up and fell to the ground with a bang, completely destroying the Snooker family's residence into a mess, like a ruin. In the billowing black smoke, Kaji looked at his hands in a daze. When did I become so strong? At first he just wanted to try it, but he didn't expect that he could actually throw a civilian building away with his bare hands. Major Kaji is too strong. Germa's technological weapons are still far inferior to Major Kaji's power. It's really too strong. It's worthy of being the elite of the headquarters. The surrounding North Sea Navy stared at Kaji with shock on their faces, and cheered enthusiastically. Listening to the cheers of the Navy around him, Kaji's heart surged, and he couldn't help but laugh with his hands on his hips. Of course, I'm a genius. He looked at a Navy's machine gun with disdain, and said disdainfully, "Guns are really primitive and crude ways of fighting." At the same time, another island in the North Sea. A similar scene was playing out. In a secret base of a mafia family, the Navy troops quickly launched an operation. Navy. Damn Navy. You're not leaving us any way out. A mafia leader with a mustache cursed angrily. While speaking, he held a huge shield made of fine steel in both hands, and rushed into the oncoming Navy crowd like a bull, and the powerful force directly knocked them off their horses. Ha 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 ha. Have you seen my power? The mafia leader laughed. But his laughter stopped abruptly the next second. Clang. He heard a clear sound of sword. Following the sound, he saw a tall black-haired figure slowly walking out of the blazing sea of fire. The sound of high heels stepping on the ground was pleasant, but it revealed an extreme coldness. It was a woman. There was a beauty mole at the corner of her mouth, her long black hair was tied into a bun behind her head, and her curvaceous body was wrapped in a pink short skirt. As she walked, the flawless white navy cloak behind her seemed to sway and dance in the flames. She held a long knife in one hand. The blade was slender, showing a dazzling gold color, reflecting the leap of the flames. This was a very powerful woman. If it were any other time, the mafia leader would probably try every means to get her into bed and conquer her. But now, he had no idea. A long and thin cut slowly spread from his giant metal shield. The strongest front of the shield, to his arm, to his throat. Blood line, slowly emerged. What a fast knife! He hissed. The shield and the man, split in two, fell down with a bang. Guillaume stood in front of him, sheathing the knife with a cold look. In the name of justice, execute the death penalty. As soon as the voice fell, the navy rushed in behind her. Shouts and wails continued to come from all directions. Guillaume stood there, lost in long contemplation. I have become much stronger, she murmured softly. She suddenly understood a lot. The special training over the past 10 days has increased her strength by at least 30%. It's just because her opponent has always been that monster-like guy, always being dominated, and the distance is always so far away, so she didn't realize the improvement of her strength. But the contemplation lasted only a few seconds, and Guillaume soon clenched his fists again and gritted his teeth. Not enough. Far from enough. On the other side. A private luxury mansion that cost a lot of money. The mansion of the leader of the famous mafia family in the British Isles in the North Sea. The Rockefeller family. In the luxurious bedroom. The leader of the Rockefeller family, Jamansa, suddenly woke up from his sleep, pulled out the pistol hidden under the pillow, and fired several shots at a shadow in the room without even looking. Bang, bang, bang. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of bullets hitting swords rang out, sparks flew, and a serious face wearing a military cap was illuminated. Jamansa's pupils shrank. It's you. His mistress shrank back with fear on her face and tightened the quilt around her. The figure of the flying squirrel walked out of the darkness. He held a saber in his hand. Blood dripped from the saber. You broke the rules. The flying squirrel said expressionlessly. So, Rogers Darren, the highest commander of the North Sea, greets you. As soon as the voice fell, a cold light flashed in the darkness. Swish. The splashing blood dyed the tent red. The next second. Ah! The woman's terrified scream resounded throughout the mansion. Please help me, thank you very much. Chapter 70 The Greatest Darkness in the North Sea. The largest and most prosperous commercial port in the North Sea. Port of Tush. When Doflamingo led many members of the Don Quixote family into the harbor of Port of Tush, they saw the following scene. Various ships were vying for territory in the port, and sails with different marks were rolling like waves. Sailors shouted loudly on the deck, and nobles and wealthy businessmen were holding pipes and directing workers on the shore, and their shouts drowned out the sound of the waves. In the distance of the port, the streets are lined with all kinds of shops. People are flowing like shuttles, and there are a wide variety of goods from the North Sea and even all over the world. Looking along the street, a city seems to expand gradually with the distance, and the densely crisscrossed inland rivers are like white silk, shuttling through large buildings and houses. Prosperous, wealthy, crowded, dirty. Everywhere is filled with the smell of money and rot. I say, it really deserves to be the largest trading port in the North Sea. Torapal, with a line of snot hanging under his nostrils, said in surprise. There should be a lot of oil and water here. Diamante, whose face was painted with colors, licked the corner of his mouth. Virgo did not speak, with half a piece of bread on his cheek. Pica laughed shrilly. Soon this place will belong to our Don Quixote family. Their faces were filled with strong ambition and arrogance. Of course, they also have the qualifications to be arrogant. In just half a month, their Don Quixote family, starting from scratch, swallowed up more than 30% of the mafia territories and underground businesses in the entire North Sea, and jumped directly to become one of the most powerful underworld forces in the North Sea with an unstoppable attitude. This speed, this attitude, this domineering, no one has ever been able to do it in the history of the North Sea. But their Don Quixote family did it. And now, this prosperous trading port in front of them is the goal of their trip. Rodriguez family. Doflamingo stood at the bow, scanning the noisy and bustling town in front of him, his lips gradually he smiled coldly. He still looked old-fashioned, with sunglasses, shirt, cropped pants, and pointed shoes. But compared to before, he had a pink feather coat on, fluttering in the salty sea breeze of the harbor, like a young and arrogant flamingo. Dover. I say, as long as we kill the Rodriguez family and swallow up all their industries, we can own half of the underground world of the North Sea, right? Torrebel walked to Doflamingo with a cane, trembling, and laughed obscenely. Doflamingo nodded and grinned. That's right, the Rodriguez family controls the port of Tush, and their power is deeply rooted in this island. Relying on the commercial convenience of the port of Tush, they control at least 30% of the illegal business in the North Sea. After dealing with them, the remaining guys who are particularly troublesome, the Snooker family, Vincent and Rockefeller, are not a big problem. Hearing the confident words of their young master, the four family cadres of Trebel laughed in admiration. Young master. In fact, we don't have to bow to that navy at all. At this time, Diamante suddenly said sinisterly. He was dissatisfied and indignant. When we take over the entire underground world of the North Sea, with such power, the North Sea Navy will not dare to do anything to us. Besides, he said it was nice, saying that the underworld of the North Sea belongs to you, but in the end, all the territory was conquered by ourselves. Did Rogers Darren help us? As soon as these words came out, everyone else fell into silence. The smile on Doflamingo's mouth gradually disappeared. He turned his head to look at Trebel and the other four. Do you all think so? The four lowered their heads, not daring to look directly into his cold eyes. We just think that you are a natural king. A king must never bow to anyone. They whispered. Doflamingo looked at them for a few seconds without saying a word, turned around, and after a moment of silence, he said calmly. I have never heard these words. I don't want to hear them again in the future. Do you understand? The four of Torrebel bowed deeply and said respectfully. Yes. But while talking, they exchanged glances with each other. Doflamingo's tone was very calm. But they knew their young master too well. Often the calmer the tone, the more it shows the turbulent and deeply suppressed anger in his heart. Will the unruly natural king really bow to another person? The surname Don Quixote does not allow him to do so. Let's go. Doflamingo took a deep breath, and his usual cold and sarcastic grin rose again. The civilians, merchants and sailors around were startled by the sudden gunshot. They looked at the slowly rising skull flag with pale faces, put down all the work in their hands in fear, and fled in panic. Members of the Don Quixote family also jumped off the ship with a grin, rushing towards the base of the Rodriguez family in the intelligence. The battle started. At the same time. A luxurious mansion. In a conference room with a closed door. The flames in the fireplace were burning, reflecting two figures facing each other across the conference round table. The middle-aged man in a black peaked lapel suit looked solemnly at the naval colonel sitting opposite him, smoking a cigar unscrupulously, and said hoarsely. I know you are angry, Admiral Darren. But as the dealer himself, don't you think it's a bit unfair? Darren narrowed his eyes and sneered. Yes, it's really unfair. But that's how the world works. The middle-aged man's forehead was bulging with blue veins, and he gritted his teeth and said. For so many years, I have followed your rules. Now I just. But you still broke the rules. Darren interrupted him unceremoniously. The middle-aged man's face turned pale in an instant. He looked at the navy in front of him with red eyes, and his fists with thick knuckles clenched and unclenched, unclenched and clenched again. Why me? He panted. No, not just you, all those who break the rules will be punished. The man was startled when he heard the words, and then he laughed. He laughed crazily and laughed until tears came out. Ha 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 ha. That's it. This is good. After fighting each other for so many years, neither of them admitted defeat. At least they all ended up in the same situation, ha 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 ha. Rogers Darren, many people call you the scum of the Navy. But I know that you are actually a poisonous snake. Extremely cunning and extremely cold-blooded, I even doubt whether you have a trace of bondage and pity in your heart. Do it. From the day I set foot on this road, I knew that this day would come sooner or later. Others call me the giant of the North Sea's underground forces. He laughed at himself, shaking with laughter, staring at Darren. It's ridiculous. In the North Sea, the darkest is you who are wearing the banner of justice. Please thank you for everything. Chapter 71 Why Should I Surrender? In the North Sea, the darkest is you who are wearing the banner of justice. In the Dome Conference Hall, the man's crazy laughter continued to echo. We, the so-called giants of the underground world, the so-called giants of the dark forces, are all tools used by you, Rogers Darren, to control the North Sea. The muscles on his face twitched hideously, and he shouted. You who hold high the banner of justice are darker and more evil than all of us. Darren looked at the panting man quietly, his expression did not change at all because of his voice. He exhaled a dragon-like smoke from his mouth and said lightly. This world is like this. Quote. This is the world of One Piece. Anime is always beautiful, full of freedom, dreams, passion, friendship, youth, kindness and other beautiful elements. The adventures of the protagonists are even more desirable, and it sounds very happy. But what is the reality? In the depths of the so-called passionate world, there is a huge cruelty and coldness. Slaves are living a life worse than death, civilians are displaced, pirates plunder without restraint, and the mafia is rampant. The world's nobles, the celestial dragons, are high above, holding godlike power and can execute civilians at will. Pirates sing praises of freedom and dreams, and the increase in bounties is something worth celebrating. The government is corrupt and greedy, and the noble politicians are living a life of drunkenness and dreams. The world government is ruled the world for 800 years, holding unimaginable terrible cards in his hands. As for the navy that defends peace is a dog in the hands of the government in the eyes of many people. The so-called justice is pale and powerless. From the perspective of the protagonists, this world itself is a dark, bloody and rotten world. Darren saw the essence of this world early on. He can't change this world for the time being. So he must be darker and more cruel than anyone else. Hearing the captain's blunt answer, the man was stunned for a moment. He was silent for a long time, gradually regained his composure, and suddenly said, For the sake of our years of cooperation, can you answer me a question? Darren nodded. No problem. The man took a deep breath, stared at Darren, and asked in a deep voice. I want to know, after solving the problem of us old guys, who do you plan to hand over the underground world of the North Sea to? Darren raised his head, staring at the chandelier on the dome, and said lightly. Don Quixote da Flamingo. The man was startled when he heard it, and then laughed. He let out a long breath. I see. He sat up slowly, buttoned his cuffs one by one, and tidied up his slightly messy peaked lapel suit, and smoothed his big back hair. Let's do it. He said with a smile. Why should I surrender? Swish. The extremely sharp silk thread whistled through the void, and the 3 mafia members who rushed over with long knives in front of him were instantly cut off by the lazy waste. The intestines and internal organs mixed with hot blood fell to the ground in large pieces. The faces of the 3 unlucky guys were still frozen with stunned expressions, and their pupils quickly became blurred. Da Flamingo hooked his fingers, and a few drops of blood splashed on his sunglasses. He continued to move forward. The members of the Don Quixote family rushed up from behind him, drew their long knives, and killed like wolves into a flock of sheep, killing people on the street. Why surrender? Da Flamingo looked at the bloody hellish streets around him, and saw the members of the Rodriguez family falling one after another in front of him. His eyes under the sunglasses were a little agitated. 5 more people jumped down from the roof of the building on the left, holding huge axes and slashing down at him from a high position. A heavy sound of breaking through the air came, and Da Flamingo just hooked his fingers. The mafia members seemed to be imprisoned by something and could no longer control their bodies. What is this? My body can't move. My hand. What are you doing? Sorry, this is not what I mean. I can't control my body. They cried out in horror, and watched their bodies move on their own in disbelief, slashing at their companions' heads. Swish! The 5 men's weapons fell at the same time, and their foreheads were cut open by their companions' weapons, leaving a shocking gap. Blood spurted out again, and they each twitched and slowly fell to the ground. The blood was getting thicker and thicker. I have the ability to control everyone's fate. Doflamingo looked indifferent. He took a step forward, and the power of the thread fruit was fully activated. Everything in front of him was cut and shattered under the sharp silk thread. I am a natural king. I am a noble celestial dragon, and I am a descendant of the Creator. No matter who it is, they must kneel in front of me. This is the treatment I deserve. Anyone who looks at me must be filled with fear. Yes, I am right to think so. Why should I surrender? Shish. Doflamingo waved his hand heavily, and dozens of silk threads were ejected immediately, twisting into a sharp whip that was tens of meters long, tearing a Rodriguez family armory in front of him to pieces. Boom! A huge explosion rose into the sky, and a dark mushroom cloud rose. Under the blazing flames, the Rodriguez family members who had no time to escape turned into burning firemen in the sea of fire, emitting miserable wails. He said that the underworld of the North Sea belongs to me. But even without him, I can easily unify the underground world of the North Sea. I am destined to be the King of Darkness. Why should I surrender? Figures kept falling in front of my eyes, and the grim laughter of Trebol and others came from all around. The world is like purgatory. Perhaps Trebol and others are right. Doflamingo continued to walk towards the magnificent mansion, leaving chaos and pain along the way. A cruel smile gradually appeared at the corner of his mouth. There is no more pleasant thing than appreciating the pain of others. He began to tremble uncontrollably. A wave of uncontrollable momentum burst out from his body, causing the feathers of the flamingo to fly wildly. Dozens of gang members rolled their eyelids and fainted directly. Step by step. Amid the wailing of grief and the crazy laughter, Doflamingo moved forward step by step. With every step, the domineering aura on his body became more and more uncontrollable and violent. The wind was raging, and the sky was changing. Why should I surrender? The Rodriguez family is just the first step. I will not stay in a small place like the North Sea forever. The Grand Line and the New World are the real stage for me, Don Quixote Doflamingo, to show my skills. The sea belongs to heroes, tyrants and overlords. The shouts and wailing gradually weakened. Doflamingo stopped. He stood in front of a luxurious mansion. The villa of Rodriguez Michael, the North Sea underworld giant and patriarch of the Rodriguez family. Unconsciously, Trebol and others, who were filled with the smell of blood, and hundreds of Don Quixote family members had gathered behind him. They looked at Doflamingo's back with admiration and enthusiasm. That arrogant back. Doflamingo looked at the door of the dome villa, and the grim smile on his face became more intense. Yes. No one can stop me from rising. No one. So, why should I surrender? Doflamingo said secretly in his heart. So. He took a deep breath, his eyes were cruel and cold, he strode forward and pushed open the door. Squeaky. The heavy bronze door slowly opened, making a dull friction sound. The smile on Doflamingo's mouth suddenly froze. I beg for everything, thank you very much. Chapter 72. Thank you, Godfather. Squeaky. The door of the luxurious villa in classical style slowly opened. The biting cold wind rushed out from behind the heavy bronze door, blowing in his face, and suddenly submerged Doflamingo's figure, blowing the pink feather coat behind him up. The whole world seemed to stop at this moment. It was as if something invisible was broken in the air. Death silence suddenly fell. The 4 Torobols who were originally aggressive, and the hundreds of Don Quixote family members holding bloody long knives behind them, held their breath in an instant and dared not move. They stared at the scene in the hall of the villa with their eyes wide open, rolling their throats with a gurgle, swallowing saliva, and a layer of fine cold sweat gradually seeped out of their foreheads. The originally chaotic and noisy world became silent. Tick. Tick. The sound of some liquid dripping on the ground sounded in the silent world, stirring everyone's extremely nervous heart. They saw such a picture. In the dome hall of the dome, the fire burned in the ancient fireplace. The dancing light and shadow intertwined with each other, outlining the outline of the hall in a brighter dark way. A mottled oval conference table with traces of time was placed in the center of the hall. The intricately carved stained glass windows on the walls on both sides flickered with dim light, and there were religious oil paintings on the dome. A person was hanging on the black wall above the fireplace. To be precise, a corpse was hanging. He had a neat slicked back hair, wore a mafia-style peaked lapel suit, a blood-red rose on his chest, and his head drooped weakly. A gleaming metal spear sank deeply into his heart, pierced through his body, and nailed him to the wall. The blood from the wound flowed down his suit, trouser legs, and leather shoes. It kept flowing out and dripping on the ground, forming the tick-tock sound they heard. They suddenly recognized the identity of the body. This was the ultimate goal of their trip. Rodriguez Michael, the head of the Rodriguez family, the underworld giant who controlled 1/3 of the illegal industry in the North Sea. And now, he was dead. Like some kind of religious mysterious ritual, he was hanging on the wall. On his drooping head, the pair of empty pupils were staring straight at all of them. The slightly raised corners of his mouth seemed to be showing them a mocking smile. Torbal and others suddenly felt their whole bodies tremble, and their pores stood up. They subconsciously moved their eyes stiffly to somewhere in the hall. In the dim hall with flickering firelight, a man sat at the main seat of the conference round table. The firelight could dispel the darkness, but it could not illuminate the man's face. His face seemed to be hidden in the shadow forever. As long as he doesn't expose himself, the world will never find him. Torebel and the others could only barely see the outline of his figure. A straight black suit, a white shirt, a solemn black tie, and black combat boots. He sat there, with his legs crossed, tapping the conference table with his fingers holding a cigar, and looking at them carelessly in the dark with sharp and deep eyes. He was smiling. Although they couldn't see clearly, all of them had such a thought in their hearts. Just in time. Darren spoke slowly, breaking the silence. The light and shadows flowed, and the firelight finally illuminated his face. He was indeed smiling. Well done. He looked at the young figure of Flamingo with praise. Da Flamingo was silent. Silent. Torebel and the others clearly saw that his fists were clenched tightly, shaking, and clenched tightly. They could only see Da Flamingo's back, but they could guess that their young master's face was extremely ugly at this moment. At this time, a whistling sound of Den Den Mushi suddenly sounded. Brew brew. Brew brew. Darren took out a military Den Den Mushi from his arms and connected the signal. It's me. A low voice slowly came out from the Den Den Mushi. Report to Base Commander Darren, as of 5 minutes ago, all our actions have ended. 17 well-known underworld forces including Snooker, Vincent and the Rockefeller family have all been eliminated under the glory of justice. As soon as these words came out, everyone in the Don Quixote family suddenly took a breath of cold air. The underground world of the North Sea has all been suppressed by the Navy. Unprecedented fear instantly flooded into their brains, making their faces turn extremely pale. The North Sea Navy carried out a bloody cleansing of the underground world. And now the highest commander of the North Sea Navy is standing in front of them, plus the body of the head of the Rodriguez family. Everyone shuddered. Could it be that their Don Quixote family is also the target of the Navy's cleansing? Well, I see, you did a good job, I am very satisfied. Darren replied to the Den Den Mushi. Start returning, I still have a little thing to deal with here, and I will be back soon. Yes, Base Commander. The military Den Den Mushi communication was interrupted. Putting away the Den Den Mushi, Darren took a puff of cigar and slowly stood up from the main seat. With such a casual movement, thousands of people in the Don Quixote family actually took a step back in unison. Only one person did not move. Da Flamingo still stood there, keeping silent. His clenched fists trembled even more violently. I don't know what violent impulse he was restraining. Darren walked towards him step by step. The faces of several people in Torebel changed slightly. Just when they were about to make a move, the captain of the navy cast a look at them casually, which made them feel like they were in an ice cellar. They dared not move. Accompanied by the sound of military boots rubbing against the ground, Darren finally walked in front of Doflamingo. He looked down at the blonde kid in front of him who was gritting his teeth and looking gloomy, and smiled. "This is a gift for you, Dov." His tone was very kind, as if an elder was concerned about his spoiled junior. "From this moment on, the underground world of the North Sea is yours." He narrowed his eyes, smiled and stretched out his hand, quietly waiting for Doflamingo's response. "Do you like it?" 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. The people in Torrebel looked at the motionless back of their young master, their hearts beat rapidly, and they were sweating profusely. "Why should I surrender? Why should I surrender?" At a certain moment, Doflamingo's tightly clenched fist suddenly stopped shaking. He loosened his fists. Trebol and others seemed to hear a silent sigh. Then they widened their eyes. They saw their arrogant young master. A smile slowly appeared on his face, and he took a step forward. Gently holding the Navy's hand. Bowed slightly. Kissed the back of his hand respectfully. "Thank you, my godfather. I ask for everything, I am grateful." Chapter 73 North Sea, only black and white. What is the most important thing in raising a wild wolf? Is it to inspire its hatred for the celestial dragons and the world government and cultivate its desire for blood? Is it to allow it to kill unruly and maintain its ferocity? Or to give it a clear enough goal to train its hunting ability? All of the above, but not entirely. The most important thing in raising a wild wolf is to completely dominate it, constantly torture it, and let this gesture of submission be deeply engraved in its brain like a mark, becoming a habit and an instinct. Let it remember forever who is its real master. This is the most important thing. Looking at the celestial dragon boy bending over and kissing the back of his hand, Darren smiled with satisfaction. "Very good, you are worthy of being my godson." He rubbed Doflamingo's short golden hair affectionately, let him stand beside him, and took his hand and walked out of the bloody dome hall step by step. Outside the ancient villa, seeing their arrogant and unruly young master being pulled out by the black-haired navy like a real child, all the menacing Don Quixote family were shocked and stood there in a daze, as if in a dream. "Dover, is this your subordinate?" Darren smiled and glanced casually at the thousands of mafia members present. Doflamingo lowered his head and replied, "Yes, godfather." Darren nodded and smiled. "Very good, it can be regarded as an elite in the North Sea. There is just one bad thing." Doflamingo whispered. "Godfather, what do you mean?" Darren's mouth curled up a sneer. "You are my godson, a natural king, remember one thing." His eyes were stern. "Except for me, anyone who sees you must kneel." As soon as the voice fell, a majestic momentum like a deep abyss and a mountain burst out from the body of the Navy captain, gushing out indiscriminately and spreading in all directions. The world seemed to fall into a dead silence at this moment, and all the colors quickly faded, leaving only black and white. The wind was mighty, sweeping away the clouds. All the Don Quixote family members, led by Torrebel, Diamante, Virgo, and Pica, had their pupils trembling violently under the impact of this aura that was like the abyss and the sea. They felt the power in their bodies fade away silently, their brains went blank, their knees bent, and they fell to the ground as if they were exhausted. Ding dang dang. Countless weapons fell from their hands, like dense raindrops falling to the ground, making a series of crisp sounds. Torrebel and the other four knelt on one knee, gritting their teeth, their faces extremely pale. They looked at the domineering North Sea Admiral with horror, and an unbelievable thought came to their minds at the same time. This strong impact from the soul was like facing the shock of thousands of troops in the roaring sea. This man's spirit has obviously become stronger than the last time. The wind and clouds of the world are changing, as if they are going to sweep across the entire North Sea. At this moment, there were only two people left standing in the world. Doflamingo, who was standing next to Darren, gritted his teeth tightly, his eyes were filled with dense and ferocious bloodshot, and his expression was changing, as if he was suppressing something. The domineering aura in his heart was ready to move, but it was obviously suppressed. "Dover, I'll wait for you in the Grand Line." Darren turned his head and squinted at his godson, smiling. The flawless white cloak roared and danced unscrupulously behind him, and the shadow it raised completely enveloped the figure of the blond boy. Doflamingo lowered his head, and his bloodshot eyes hid the ambition and coldness that were suppressed tightly, and he said respectfully, "Yes, Godfather." In September 1492 of the Sea Circle calendar, under the order of Rogers Darren, the highest commander of the North Sea Navy and the North Sea Admiral, the North Sea Navy fleet carried out a bloody suppression and cleansing of more than 20 well-known mafia families within the North Sea. This action completely ended the chaos of the rampant underground forces in the North Sea for decades or even hundreds of years. Within a week after the action, the Don Quixote family headed by Doflamingo effortlessly took over the entire underground world of the North Sea, and its power continued to expand, and soon developed into a behemoth that should not be underestimated. Its industries cover arms smuggling, customs, gambling, espionage, intelligence trafficking and other industries, and its tentacles even extend to other seas and even the Grand Line. From then on, a saying began to spread in the North Sea. "The world is colorful, but in the North Sea, there is only black and white." Since then, the world has recognized that the chaotic North Sea has entered a stable and peaceful order. You are really a lunatic, letting things go like this. Aren't you afraid that one day you can't curb Doflamingo's ambitions and be stabbed in the back by him? North Sea 321 Naval Branch, Base Chief's Office. The flying squirrel flipped through the intelligence documents in his hand, looking helplessly at his boss who was sitting there leisurely smoking a cigar, a headache. On the document in his hand, there was a lot of news about the recent annexation of major mafia industries by the Quixote family. The scale of the industry, the number of people, the countries and towns involved, all kinds of information were clearly listed. "He dares not." Darren replied casually, looking through the floor-to-ceiling glass at the other side of the sea. The flying squirrel frowned. "Are you sure? That kid doesn't look like a law-abiding person." Darren slowly came back to his senses, looked at the flying squirrel, and smiled. "It is because I know he won't be law-abiding that I feel relieved. The truly dangerous enemy is often not this kind of ambitious kid, but those seemingly insignificant guys who hide all their conspiracies in their hearts. Doflamingo is a very talented guy. I need him to help me stabilize the situation in the North Sea. The greater his power, the more benefits we will get. With his identity as a celestial dragon, as a barrier, the Navy headquarters, no, even the world government will be a little afraid and dare not easily interfere in the affairs of the North Sea." The flying squirrel pondered and said, "Of course I understand this truth, but I have seen that guy, and I can see that the way he looks at you is not right. What I am worried about is that after you leave the North Sea, will he?" Darren waved his hand to interrupt the flying squirrel and asked a seemingly irrelevant question instead. "Do you know the spirit of the king? It is said that only one spirit can be born among millions of people. Is it the domineering Haki?" "Yes." Darren smiled. "Doflamingo is the one who awakens the domineering Haki, which is why I chose him." There seemed to be some deep meaning in his eyes. Strength, speed, size, status are all secondary. In this sea, the real decision of the final victory or defeat is spirit. As long as my domineering Haki is stronger than his, he will never dare to rebel against me. Please give me everything, thank you very much. Chapter 74: A Shortcut to Awakening Conqueror's Haki. Conqueror's Haki. Flying Squirrel muttered to himself, but he quickly reacted and stared at his boss who was sitting with his legs crossed and smoking in disbelief. "Wait, you awakened Conqueror's Haki?" Darren glanced at him and smiled. "Yes. During the battle with Doflamingo on Lubeck Island, he ordered Flying Squirrel to lead the Navy to directly block the island, evacuate civilians, and set up a cordon. When he and Doflamingo collided with Conqueror's Haki, Flying Squirrel was still busy giving orders, so he didn't know. When did it happen?" Flying Squirrel took a breath of cold air, his face full of confusion. He had heard that Conqueror's Haki was rare. In the North Sea, even the previous North Sea admiral, Sakaski, who was called a monster, had not successfully awakened it. Maybe in the Grand Line or the New World, there are many strong men who have awakened the Conqueror's Haki, but they are basically the famous strong men among the pirates. For example, the great pirate Whitebeard, and the mysterious Roger. However, in the Navy, there are very few people who can awaken the Conqueror's Haki. As a violent law enforcement agency under the world government, the Navy focuses on discipline and obedience with clear hierarchy. There is simply not enough space and soil for free will to arise, not to mention that there are such high-ranking existences as the world's noble celestial dragons above them. Under such conditions, it is as difficult for a navy to awaken the king's spirit. As far as Flying Squirrel knows, the only Navy members who have awakened the Conqueror's Haki are the current Navy Marshal Kong, the Navy Headquarters Admiral Buddha Sengoku, and the strongest Marine Vice Admiral Garp, who has the name of Hero. But now Darren actually told me that he had successfully awakened the Conqueror Haki. Does this mean this guy's talent is stronger than the so-called monsters, Sakaski and Borsellino? If I didn't know Darren's character, the Flying Squirrel would have thought he was fooling me. When Darren exhaled a puff of smoke from his mouth, smiling and saying, "It's probably when Shield Saint was attacked by a Sea King creature and died. Probably. Well, if you also want to awaken the Conqueror Haki, I have a good way." The Flying Squirrel had a bad premonition in his heart, but he still asked. "What?" Darren threw up a coin. The coin suddenly melted in the air and twisted into a dagger with a cold glow. The sharp tip of the knife, perpendicular to the ground, pointed directly to the sky. "Kill a celestial dragon," he said lightly. "Flying Squirrel." The corners of his mouth twitched constantly, and several black lines appeared on his forehead. "Are you serious?" Darren shrugged and said. "Who knows, this is just my guess, but I think it is likely to be useful. This method may not be too effective for pirates, after all, they are lawless guys. But for the Navy, it will definitely have an extremely drastic impact on their personal will. So the so-called domineering color, according to my personal experience and understanding, is ultimately the external manifestation of personal will and courage, and generally awakens in extreme conditions. This extreme state does not refer to physical danger. After all, as a Navy, we take great risks whenever we go on a mission. The so-called extreme state refers to the mind. As a Navy, from the day we put on our military uniforms, we have been trained and educated to obey orders and maintain world peace and justice, but in fact everyone knows very well. It's just a lie. We may be defending justice, but we know deep down that our mission and actions are more about maintaining the rule of the world government. And at the top of the world government are the celestial dragons who sit high above the clouds and call themselves gods. Darren's voice gradually became lower. His deep eyes flashed with an inexplicable light, and he smiled and said, "For a Navy, what is more exciting than killing the God, who is high above and gives us orders? How about it, do you want to try the feeling of killing a god? Watching the ugly faces of the celestial dragons wailing in front of you, witnessing them kneeling in front of you begging for mercy, leaving the noble, great descendants of the Creator without any posture and dignity. Aren't you curious about that feeling?" Looking at Darren's half-smiley eyes, the Flying Squirrel shuddered and subconsciously took a step back. Ha 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 ha. Seeing the Flying Squirrel taking a step back, Darren couldn't help laughing. The Flying Squirrel rolled his eyes unhappily. "You bastard, don't tempt me. You are such a devil. No wonder you can't stop Doflamingo. Sometimes I start to wonder if your devil fruit has the ability to bewitch people." I have to admit that the Flying Squirrel found that he was tempted by Darren's proposal for a moment. However, as soon as this thought came up, he felt a chill all over his body, and the pores on his back stood up. The dagger in the air turned back into a coin again. The lines, numbers and patterns on it were exactly the same as before, without any change, and it was extremely exquisite. Darren caught the coin falling in the air, gently placed it on the desk, and smiled. That ability may exist, but in the final analysis, the so-called human heart is actually very simple. As long as it is a human, Whether it is a high-ranking superior or a humble civilian, there are weaknesses and desires. Money, wealth, power, status, fame, beauty, gambling, cigarettes, fine wine. There are many ways to kill a person, and violence is the simplest and most direct way. But if you want to destroy a person's will, you must find his weakness. The desire to destroy is a weakness that most people have. Don't be surprised. Our Navy's duty is of course to protect, but the Navy is also human, and humans have desires. When faced with magnificent and extremely beautiful things, you will have the impulse to worship, pity and protect them at the first time, but in the deepest part of your heart, you will also have a twisted desire to destroy. What would it feel like if I destroyed such a beautiful thing with my own hands? We often have similar thoughts. So there are love stories in the world, where people who can't get love will be cruelly killed. And what is the most sacred, beautiful, noble and greatest thing in the world? Naturally, it is the world government and the dragon people. Perhaps one day, when the people of this world look at the behemoth that has ruled the world for 800 years, their fearful eyes will change a little. How wonderful will that picture be? Please help me, thank you very much. I am still not well, so I can only update as usual, sorry. Chapter 75 Encirclement. You are really a lunatic. Listening to Darren's shocking words, the flying squirrel couldn't help but smile bitterly and said, "Are you sure I can listen to these words?" Darren smiled and said, "Why not? From the day you said you wanted to go with me, I saw that you have such potential." The long history and brainwashing of the world government have divided this sea into different levels. The celestial dragons are high above and in control of everything, but with the changes of the times and the rise of heroes, this inherent concept will inevitably usher in great changes. He slowly leaned back on the chair, picked up the wine glass and took a sip, with an elegant posture. Of course, this is just a guess of mine. To further confirm it, more examples and data are needed to support it. The flying squirrel looked at Darren's half-smiley eyes, and felt uncomfortable all over his body. The corners of his mouth twitched and said, "Are you treating me as a guinea pig?" Darren laughed. "Your name is Flying Squirrel, isn't it?" Flying Squirrel. Darren looked at the expression of Flying Squirrel that looked like he had eaten shit, and laughed even more happily. After a while, he restrained his smile and said slowly, "Actually, it's not a joke. I'm worried about leaving the North Sea to others. After I leave the North Sea for Marineford, this sea area will be handed over to you, Flying Squirrel." The expression on his face became serious. Although Doflamingo seems to have been much more obedient after being beaten, he is an ambitious man after all. The guy who is so angry. You can continue to use the card of Germa. You can provoke the conflict between the two families in a targeted manner. Our North Sea Navy is only a mediator in the middle. There is no need for too much. It is better to have fewer scenes where the dealer personally takes part, otherwise all players will have to fold their cards. But power and means are only one aspect after all. The most important thing is strength. The flying squirrel nodded deeply and said in a deep voice, "Don't worry, I have never been lazy in my practice." Darren nodded when he heard it. At this time, a rapid call of Den Den Mushi suddenly sounded. Bulu Bulu, Bulu Bulu. Darren and the flying squirrel were both stunned at the same time, and their eyes looked at the military Den Den Mushi on the desk. "I am Darren." Darren reached out to connect the signal and said in a deep voice. "Darren, it's me." General Sengoku's serious voice came out of the military Den Den Mushi, revealing a kind of solemnity. "General Sengoku, what happened?" Darren frowned, looked at the flying squirrel, and exchanged glances. According to the information they knew, Sengoku should be in the process of hunting down and conquering the World Destroyer, Bondi Waldo in conjunction with the CP members of the world government. There was a problem with the operation to conquer Bondi Waldo. Because of the increase in the bounty, Bondi Waldo has increased his vigilance. The reinforcements from the headquarters have completely blocked the only route from the North Sea to the Grand Line. But Bondi Waldo and his men are hiding in the North Sea. On the other side of the Den Den Mushi, Sengoku's eyebrows were twisted as if they were filled in with a black pen. "Darren, I know you have been operating in the North Sea for many years and have a certain say and influence in this sea area. This time I need to use your connections in the North Sea to find out where Bondi Waldo is hiding." Hearing Sengoku's words, Darren raised his eyebrows. Since taking the Black Pot of Shield Saint, the Navy has increased the bounty of World Destroyer Bondi Waldo from 200 million Baileys to 400 million Baileys. But I didn't expect this guy to become cautious and careful because of this, which was something I couldn't expect. Darren thought for a moment and said slowly, "General Sengoku, using the power of the North Sea Fleet and my connections. This is not a problem. But what I want to know is, have you fought with Bondi Waldo again? Are you evaluating the extent of his possible counterattack?" Zhang is indeed a wise general, and he immediately realized the intention of Darren's question. "Yes, General Zhang. If Bondi Waldo is injured, he is likely to take extreme revenge." Darren pondered and said, "I mean not only our Navy, but also civilians." Zhang was silent for a moment, and slowly said, "I did fight him several times during this period. He was injured." Darren smiled with satisfaction. "I understand, General Zhang. I will arrange people to search and track Bondi Waldo's whereabouts as soon as possible. I can't miss the merit that comes to my door. The North Sea has been completely blocked. With the navigation technology of this era, Bondi Waldo can't pass through the doldrums and enter the New World. This also means that this is a game of catching turtles in a jar. The legendary pirate, a strong man who is as famous as Whitebeard and Roger, Darren certainly wants to see in person how far he is from such a existence. At the same time. North Sea. Lubeck Island, port. A pirate ship with traces of war on its surface and in ruins slowly sailed into the port. On the bow, a burly and imposing figure stood there with his hands folded. He wore a horned helmet, had a gray-green beard, and a pair of dark green eyes, flashing a turbid and sinister look. Bondi Waldo. A blood-stained bandage was tied on his chest. What a disaster. That damn yellow monkey. Bondi Waldo raised his hand and pressed the blood-stained bandage on his chest. Although the wound hit by the laser beam had stopped bleeding, it still hurt. No one expected that the tall rear admiral was even more wretched than he looked. While he was fighting with Zhang Guo, he suddenly attacked. "Waldo, are you okay?" At this time, an old and emaciated little man came up with difficulty. He still had an IV in his arm, his face was listless, and his skin was wrinkled. Bin Jack, the vice-captain of the Walled Pirates, was also the think tank of the group, similar to the existence of Wald's brother. "Brother, don't worry, I'm fine." Bondi Waldo smiled innocently at his brother. He had been dependent on his brother since he was a child, and he wanted to travel around the world and have a great adventure. Bin Jack looked at Bondi Waldo with some worry, opened his mouth, but said nothing in the end. "So brother, are you sure about the largest underground cave in the North Sea? Is the world broker on this island? That guy named Doflamingo?" Bondi Waldo raised his head, squinted his eyes and looked at the prosperous island and port in front of him, and said sinisterly. Bin Jack nodded and said weakly, "Yes, the Don Quixote family is already the largest mafia force in the North Sea. According to the intelligence we have collected, their sphere of influence is so large and their methods are so rampant. Even the North Sea Navy has to stay away from them. But Waldo, are you sure you want to do this? We can still turn back now." Bondi Waldo laughed. "Brother, our dream of traveling around the world has not yet been realized. How can the great adventure of the Ward Pirates end in this mere North Sea?" He waved his hand violently, and his momentum rose. "Go, find that kid named Doflamingo. We will get the power to destroy the Navy from him. Yang has had a high fever for several days and has been hospitalized. I'm sorry that the update has been affected.